And we're recording for this meeting, and we'll be broadcasting online as well to our folks at home. We are now broadcasting, looking to our online audience, and I refer to our co-chairs.
Okay, good evening. I'll open the planning board meeting. And I'll begin with a roll call for planning board members. Alden Clark. Here. Paul Hope.
Here.
Charlie Palmisano.
Here.
Jamie Pennington is not here. Heather Rogers is not here. Ben Bluestein.
Here.
Brian Balcom.
Here.
And I'm the chair, Rick Tanger. And before we get into the public hearings, I'd like to have a motion from the board. I understand that the sponsors of the two zoning public hearings have agreed to reverse the order, so I would like to have a motion for the planning board to take the Port Plaza overlay district out of order and take that first.
I'll move to change the order of the public hearing.
Okay, any discussion? Not all in favor? Okay, that passes. Start over to you.
This is Heather Shan, Chair of the Planning and Development Committee. We have Connie Preston and Mark Wright and other members of the Planning and Development Committee here tonight for our joint meeting on the P5 overlay and the ADU. So I'll call our meeting to order as well. We also have those of these our committee of the whole items. Councilor Khan, Councilor Harmon, Councilor McCauley, Councilor Giddy, and Councilor Grannis are here.
Okay, so we will begin with the joint public hearing on the ordinance to amend the Newburyport zoning ordinance to establish a new Port Plaza overlay district. Continued from October 2nd. We have a presentation from the sponsors.
Just very brief conversation, not really a presentation. I just wanted to provide you with an update to the extent that it's helpful. So in the interim between the last meeting and this meeting, the Planning and Development Committee of the City Council has met. And so coming into that meeting, the two sponsors presented some friendly amendments, essentially amended our own proposal. And then in the context of that meeting, we went through, in particular, I would say, the section about, development standards, particularly bullet point number 4 in each romanette, and that produced some additional amendments. All of them, frankly, were friendly at that time. And I believe, I'm hoping that the director, Andy Port, has circulated that to you all. And so you may have had a chance to look at it. And largely, the changes were around tightening some of the language, cleaning up some of the questions about the 4 and 5 lots. If you had a chance to look at it, you probably remarked on that, hopefully making it a lot clearer and making it sort of plainly clear that we're referring to the area in the black dash line very specifically. And then also some adjustments to the maximum square footage of the building and a few other things. So at this time, there are a couple of outstanding issues that need to be resolved, but we're sort of hoping that we've presented enough to the planning board that you may feel in a position to just give us an advisory opinion one way or the other, or maybe some things that we should continue to consider so the city council can finish its work and take a vote on this one way or the other and have the answer.
Okay, we'll open up the city councilors and planning board members for any questions or, I guess at this point, any questions before we go any further. And do you have any like those? Yes.
I guess we're small enough, right? So coming out of last Tuesday's meetings where we generated a lot of these revisions or amendments, I guess. So section 33D 4D. It's the one about the maximum stories. So we had some discussion and debate about 4 or 5 stories. I see that you guys settled on 4. Where can I just ask where thoughts on that?
So specific to the height and the total amount of square footage, those haven't changed, but they also we haven't finished the conversation on those. Either between myself and my co-sponsor and with the committee. We were waiting on the planning office to help us do some calculations they have. And so we went from 22, for example, on the square footage, went from 22 to 68. But as I mentioned last week in committee, there was some discussion that may still be insufficient based on the plans that were presented, because it, as always, in the details, how you measure. So that number may be closer to 100,000 square feet, but that still is a conversation. And the same thing I would say applies largely to the height, the 4 stories versus 5. So This is exactly as we finished the meeting last week, not the product of more amendment. I didn't personally want to kind of muddy it by throwing in more amendments in the middle of the conversation. So is this the final form on those two figures? And those are the two things that are really outstanding? I don't know yet, but I think that's something the council can take up and finish and resolve.
Okay.
In conversation.
Does the planning board agree that, given that, let me be very clear. What I desperately want tonight is for us to close this public hearing and move the process forward. So I guess the question to the planning board is, given the language as it exists, is that enough for you guys to be able to move forward, knowing that that may change? Yeah.
I have some questions, but I'm not sure that what you're talking about right now is specific to any of my questions per se.
Hear your question?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Well, just following up on that, this is more maybe for the planning director. Where the maximum building structure height is 4 stories, 45 feet. If you have one height on the Low Street side and the other height on the parking lot side, would it be a maximum height on the Low Street side of 4 stories?
We would generally be taking the mean average grade around.
Well, that's height, that's not story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So, generally speaking, if you want to be comfortable with the plan you're seeing, which would then take into account the Low Street stuff. Be a 5-story. Whereas if you were looking at the parking lot side, if you were contemplating the plans that we were seeing, it would be 5 stories to achieve that plan versus 4 stories.
So I guess I'd raise that with the sponsors. Would you want to have, to allow the kind of development we saw?
Yeah, well, I think the long story short is it's an open question. No, so when I mentioned there are a few things outstanding, these are really the two. The footprint of the building, the 22 to 68 to possibly more square foot, call it coverage of the lot, if you will, or the footprint. And the second is the height. And I think, to your point, as always, height seems to be a very amorphous thing because it depends where you measure it and how you think about it. So I think these are the final debates that council really needs to have. And we talked last week about setting the stage, if you will, for future efforts in this same area and what precedent do we want to set or not, understanding that it's not a legal precedent, but just that, we are sort of making a statement about what's acceptable in the area. I will say, I don't think generally speaking, the 5 back and the 4 front, if you consider the lot side to be front, was overly controversial.
I guess just following up, if you're asking us at this point to say we recommend 4 stories, then that's, because you're asking for a planning board recommendation. I guess how would you like the recommendation to come?
Well, I mean, if the planning board has a strong feeling one way or the other about what the maximum height could or should be, we're happy to take that into account. But we're also okay if you're not sure, as we're not, and we need to have a little bit more debate on it. I just think, I've been around long enough when the planning boards, the recommendations were fairly minimalistic and just, here are a few things to think about, to very in-depth, you should change these words. So anywhere on that spectrum as you see fit is, of course, your prerogative, and understand that. And we would welcome any feedback anywhere on that spectrum. But I think the broader question we ask ourselves is, again, would we want to see a litany of 5-story buildings in that area? We're all hoping, of course, to achieve SHI and to have that local control return back to us. And that's part of this big endeavor, and that would give us that control in zoning, but we want to have a sensible start here with this proposal.
I'm curious as to your thoughts as to changing it to be not allowing mixed use.
So, we talked about this at length in committee as well. And part of this was sort of a conversation about the quantum of vote. And so you had raised that question in a prior planning board meeting, is it 6 or is it 8? And we have the city solicitor, so certainly I don't have to pretend to be an attorney, which I'm not. But I mean, generally speaking, the understanding is that all residential has a quantum of 6 and a majority vote, and that having the mixed use is what would push you potentially up into the 8. So in an effort to simplify it. Now, with that said, there is the potential that the council could take an additional vote or an additional ordinance to then allow mixed use. But last thing I'll say is we also backed away from the idea of sort of trying to require or really forcibly add mixed use into it. in an effort to keep the developer sort of interested in this.
Yeah, kind of related to that. Go ahead.
I was just gonna add, we also in discussion and the amendments, the final whereas at the very beginning, we did add the including the potential for mixed use there. Given that, you know, I think, you know, we had the discussion in committee, I personally would very much like to see commercial use there. Again, I put myself in saying, if I lived in the building, I would like to go downstairs and get coffee, you know, those sorts of things. But given the constraints of it, it wasn't one of the constraints we really wanted.
So given the fact that you're not going to be, well, maybe this doesn't make it, I just point out that among the design requirements in the smart growth district is a 12-foot first floor to accommodate commercial uses. But I guess you don't, the idea that you might, the council might, in a subsequent vote, allow commercial uses, you shouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, I mean, you know, the zoning board would still have a say in here. It could be a dimensional variance, I think, in that case, and they could go for a shorter first height if they're, because I think the general lead is to allow mixed use, not to require mixed use. So knowing what the final answer is going to be is impossible at this time.
And then my final suggestion would be in section 33C, under the paragraph of application for plan approval,
Yes.
and there are a number of items A, B, and C in the development agreement. I would simply suggest that you add an item D, saying that the development agreement should be binding on all successors and assigns, just so that, you know, because you're talking about the current owner of the property.
Yeah, happy to add that belt and suspenders. I think we were intent wise, we're trying to capture that in A with running it with the land, but I'm all for any more words we can add that make it crystal clear that here in this case, we're talking about a single, essentially becomes a single parcel, a single project. But we're very keenly aware of the potential that other parties could always get involved one way or the other. So I don't see any problem with adding something.
And then, if I may, I'd like to ask our legal counsel just two questions that are related to this. And it's not that I'm opposed to this at all, it's just that I'm worried. So there are two provisions here that are a little bit unusual. And I just wanted to get your take on it. The first one is under section 33B, establishment. And it's in red, in this red line version, if you have that in front of you. But basically says the zoning district is as shown in our plan, and it will be defined by meets and bounds after an application or when an application is submitted. So is that something that can be done? In other words, that the actual definition of where the zoning district is doesn't need a final city council vote?
Oh, it does need a final city council vote because you need to be able to show it on your map. So,
What showed the map is a general.
So the- right, but then it should be refined by the meets and bounds. I mean, I think that there's obviously a technical difference. I don't know enough about the site and the differences to tell you whether it's a substantive difference.
My sense is not a substantive difference.
Then I think it's not an issue if it's not a substantive difference, because you're defining it. You're just asking for another type of way to define the same area.
And then the other question is, oh, yes, sorry.
So do we feel it necessary to say that's bounds versus a site? Because we don't use nets and bounds as much as we used to in the past. What do you do with that?
If I may, it's not common, actually, very common to have meet and bounds, zoning maps are established, generally speaking, and going back in time. So, I guess generally speaking, my, view of this is we really would be applying this additional sentence here, shall be as a specific on that. And, as Karen was indicating, there might be a difference between them. There really isn't any. The meets and bounds that are depicted on the plan below here, and the meets and bounds that were on that contemplated plan we were looking at. So in essence, I wouldn't really see any something between those, but we really wouldn't be relying upon that might be the site plan review process, because it's such a you know, 6 inches or something on a plan, no one will be able to distinguish. Really effectively for zoning purposes, we will be using this map unless there was some, you know, finer detail to be worked out. As I mentioned, it's such a negligible difference. We're talking these two plans being compared.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the meets and bounds plans may ultimately be useful, as the planning director said, in site plan review for engineering review of a project. And that's why I think it's tied to an application.
And then the other final thing that I would, raise is just your general advice about this issue of the plan being subject to a development agreement that isn't adopted as part of the zoning. So it's a separate agreement that has to have certain things in it. And, I know the planning director uses the term contract, so I'm not sure that's my concern, just the idea of of not adopting everything in the zoning, having other things that are adopted outside of the zoning to be part.
If I may go just for the record on the Department Attorney Harris, I think the sponsor just for the record have suggests revision to, rather than the word effective. Meaning eligibility for the applications for to note that because that language is in the title of that section.
So, you know, when you look at the case law on, what could be called contract zoning, there is, as long as there are reasonable sort of planning reasons and purposes for doing that, making those distinctions, and the legislature, the city council has a valid reason for requiring that development agreement, which I believe it does and has laid out in that section. I don't have any concerns with it. Welcome.
Does anybody else have anything to offer? Yes, Tom.
A couple of questions. Couple of you. I guess this is under item number 4 related to open space. The current amendment language calls for 100 square feet per unit, which current discussion would be a little over 20,000 square feet of open space. But when I go to the smart growth district, it suggests that open space should be usable public and semi-public common spaces adjoining sidewalk that create activated pedestrian areas for dining or similar social activities. So that's an urban solution for open space, which is an expansion of the public realm, the sidewalk and street environment versus 100 square feet per unit, which is kind of more of a suburban solution, more about green space. So when I look at the definition of open space in the zoning code, it talks about space on a lot unoccupied by buildings. It's not streets, driveways, off-street parking, or loading spaces. So it will be very difficult to get to 20,000 square feet of open space, given the definition that exists. And I really would question whether that should be our goal to begin with, or whether we should be more consistent with the smart growth district requirements and look to have a minimal setback from the sidewalk. I think it's 60% of street frontage, the way it's described in the smart growth district, before there can be a setback. So it creates more of an urban environment. And if we're thinking about urban mixed use for this broader context, I think that's something that we should think about very seriously. So I think 20,000 square feet of open space as it's defined will be a very difficult thing to achieve, and I'm not sure we even want that in this context. So that's one question. The other question related to open space and setbacks is whether or not along Low Street, we want to think about a more significant setback or perhaps other mitigations along Low Street, given all of the public commentary about traffic and safety along Low Street, and try to stay away from the solution that is being proposed right now, but if hypothetically there were residential units that fronted on Low Street at the ground level of the building, all of that activity spilled out, I think you want enough of a setback between the building and the sidewalk that we feel like there's a level of safety there for pedestrians. So right now, we've got a minimum setback. I think the scheme that's proposed has only about a 6-foot setback from the property line. I know this, Rick, this came up when we talked about the expanded residential district next to the commuter rail. But I think that bears a little bit more discussion. And I'm not even clear where the property line is along there. The diagram is pretty fuzzy. But I think that should be resolved with more specific dimensions. I think safety is the primary. But I would go back again to my first point. I think the open space requirement needs to be thought about again, and it should be more consistent with the smart growth district. So that's one question.
So if I may, I'm happy to talk to them a little bit. So I think this also did come up in committee, and really I like that you asked the question together because they're all related. I mean, I think what you're following from an intent standpoint is we're obviously being pushed on these, square footage of the footprint of the building, going from 22 to 68, possibly to more, because we are starting with the renderings as sort of a point of start. And at the same time, though, we're asked being going up, and then so we're basically pushing the sort of the limits on all ends. So I don't think there's an inherent disagreement that we could solve it in different ways. We could solve it with setbacks instead of an open space requirement. The open space requirement could be a way to try and force the thing to open a little bit up, so it's not just a monolithic 95,000 square foot building that's a giant enormous rectangle. And for reference, for those, just because I'm not the best at spatial relations, I mean, we're talking roughly between 4 and 5 Boston Way buildings glued together to get to that volume. So I think if there were recommendations about saying maybe that's the trade, and that's what we tried to talk about a little bit in committee, was maybe we back off 100 square feet, maybe we ask for a setback, maybe we don't grant the full 93,000. And, with respect, I think we're all trying to approach it from the sense of those renderings, but at the same time, this entire exercise has been a little bit about at least understanding what we might like to see down there, instead of just saying, let's just write a zoning that's the same as the picture, which didn't seem to create any opportunity for resident input. So personally, having a little setback off of Low Street may be making a lot of people happy, say, for example, in the area, and those that have to traverse it and be near it. And does it really matter as much if there's an open space in the middle of it? Perhaps not. So I think there's a lot of openness to that. And if you've had figures, like you said, come down to 50 or 20 square feet, or maybe eliminate the open space requirement in favor of something else, as long as we can hit that intent, trying not to allow a singular, basically warehouse style building, I think we can all find compromise.
I keep looking at this in the context of the goals of the broader district. And if the broader district is about an urban pedestrian environment, that's streetscape, and we can talk about sidewalks in a minute, but streetscapes, a widening of that public realm where you want a plaza space, where you want, restaurants opening out to the outside. That's the kind of environment that I think we're talking about in the broader district. And when I see the 100 square feet per unit, that kind of means there's a suburban formula working. I don't think there's really consistent. So that's one thing. Just in terms of the building footprint, I think there may eventually be a discussion about this, but 68,000, I think, relates to the residential ground floor plan. There's below that, there's a parking garage. And the parking garage has a much larger footprint than 68,000. So it's a question of how we want to conclude in terms of the maximum footprint of the building. But on Low Street, that parking garage footprint is above grade. But the north side of the building, where the elevation is 10 feet higher, it's very below grade. So the question as to how the city would consider that. That footprint is larger than the 68,000 that you're talking. That may want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the figure 68,000 came from one of the drawings. It was in one of the bullet points. And then the question internally became, how did they get to 68,000? And there was some theory that maybe the way that they were counting rooftop space was potentially either being included or excluded and so forth. The 93,000 figure, I would probably defer to Director Fort because his office computed that based on trying to take approximations off of this map to really give what the actual ground coverage is. Lastly, to your point, yes, this is the great debate. I mean, it's not just what do you count, it's what do you what is it you're trying to achieve here with this? And I think, usually we talk about lot coverage percentages, but in this case, we've been more attacking the square footage on the ground. So I don't know if Andy, you want to add anything about how you calculated?
Yeah. You kind of look up just by eyeballing, looking at this graphic right here. Essentially, just because we did not have a survey plan or meets and bounds provided by the landowner or developer for this concept, we did have overlay of lines on an aerial photograph. Basically taking this plane right here and what we call georeferencing, meaning stretching it to fit the site in our GIS mapping software. Our office coordinator ran through the software to get the calculations of these areas, and in essence, what we were looking at was recognizing that this building footprint right here wraps around here. So this is the ground level, this is sort of the driveway turnaround. Again, this is a concept plan. This is not referenced directly to zoning. It's the concept plan that we've all been debating in contrast to different permit options. But this, in turn, trying to just make sure that we're all talking about accurate numbers, it seemed apparent that looking at this and then looking at this, we were sort of making sure we're all talking about the same numbers. And what was noticed was that this line right here actually is representative of a first floor on that graphic, where this is actually a level above, essentially, where there's outdoor space for the residents obviously living there. Same thing here and here. But when you look at the renderings, it's actually up here above grade.
Go back one to the section.
This.
Yeah, so you'll see the section, the parking garage extends all the way to the face of the building on the north side.
Mhm.
And you will assume just on efficient parking garage layout, that will be a rectangle that is below the building. Top of it, all of these open spaces could be on the roof of the park. Even the drop off area, unless it created a very efficient parking, and that would be it.
Well, in the rendering they provided, that's a grade level of the market. That would be Shaw's parking.
Parking underneath.
Below that. That's below that. Yeah, below that. Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, I think depending on how you measure a building, you measure the parking garage footprint, it would be bigger than. the measure.
Gotcha, right. The footing is for that foundation wall for the garage back here. Yes, understood.
Just to build on that, I mean, given what we see in the site plan and the outline of the zoning district, do we even need to have maximum building footprint? No, because it can't get any bigger than the lot. Right? So right now, the building is essentially the lot. I think you don't need to have a maximum building footprint.
Yeah.
I think
The only
you
area
can have
here.
Sure.
This is the exit.
Oh, yeah, so I think that you're getting into a process. So if you just take it out, you lose all the ambiguity.
I think that's fair, as long as potentially we can offset it though, to something, kind of a setback consideration or this open space, something, but I hear what you're saying, and yeah, I think this would have been more relevant if there were gonna be more than one building on the lot, and then you would say, okay, don't make one ginormous one, one tiny one, or try and be reasonable, but yeah, I think that's fair.
So on building height, I guess I would just say, there's a way of defining this, so it's 4 stories above the elevation at the north side of the building. That's a formula that I think translates effectively across the overall site. Again, 3 stories of residential above commercial. That gets you your 4 stories or 45 feet in height. And yes, the site slopes down to Low Street. It creates another 10 feet. I think that can be accommodated, but I think your baseline elevation ought to be the upper elevation of the site, and which would be more common to the overall site. And we go 4 stories from there. just a couple of other quick things. And again, the question of whether we want to add any more detail other than the reference to the smart growth district. But smart growth district requires 5-foot wide sidewalks. It also requires street trees every 30 feet. Talks about street lights, street furniture, etc. And again, thinking about the broader mixed use development, and this is the first piece of what we hope will be an entire district. The way this property is defined right now is this property includes the sidewalks on the north side and the west side of the building, also the low street. Primarily the north side and the west side, which means that sidewalk detail really ought to sort of assume what the broader sidewalk detail should be for the district. I don't have any problem with the 5-foot dimension mentioned in the smart growth district, but not really clear that there's another dimension that should accommodate street trees. So I would suggest that we, rather than just say 5-foot sidewalks, we say a 5-foot pedestrian passage dimension of the sidewalks and 3 feet for landscape and street trees. Then you have a formula that kind of can be applied to the overall district.
So a total of 8, you mean? 3 plus 5?
It would be 3 plus 5, 8 feet.
And just to build on that, if I could, I think we could do better than the street view, this, that they have here with the trees on the inside of the side. It'd be nicer for pedestrians if the trees were a buffer area between the sidewalk.
And again, that relates to the commercial and restaurant and not creating a barrier between the sidewalk and the commercial space. That's why street trees are all without a curb line. So yeah, a detail like that, I think, should find its way into this. The only other thing I would say, and I'm not suggesting we change any language related to this, but the smart growth district also has an extensive section related to design standards. And I support all of those design standards, but it concerns me that we are in a process discussing a specific scheme where there isn't a design review of what is being proposed. And whether or not it's pushing for consistency in the smart growth district, or whether it's a review of the design proposal independent of the smart growth district. I think it's very, very important for a project of this size and this impact on the city to have some design. And I'm not clear on whether that's not the only place that you could leverage the smart growth district is in this proposal, the overlay district. So I would hate to see this project go all the way through, friendly 40B or not, without there being some specific.
Yeah, I guess I would just say I share your heartburn, but it's very difficult to square that with needing to do this by right and avoiding the special permit route, which is probably a threshold question for the viability of this thing in the first place. So in that sense, I would offer that 40R is probably the best that we could do, in the sense that at least we have those design guidelines and at least they provide some bumpers. Are they as good as a board-driven, design, more formal design review? They're not, but absent, rewriting those, and that was why we started with 40R as a foundation thing anyways. I don't see us reasonably being able to achieve that, and that it would still be acceptable, again, to either do special permit or to try and rewrite the design standards to be even, say, more, desirable or more favorable.
But it's not clear that even the 40R standards apply unless this overlay district is.
Oh, well, yeah, so I mean, now you're rewinding all the way to the first meeting. That's the endeavor here, right? We're hoping that maybe we can get some traction with this, but I talked ad nauseum about that we may not. and risks around that. So
This is
I
just
hear your heartburn.
my
Yeah, my
heartburn
together.
that in general, I think there needs to be more of a conscious effort regarding design review of these major projects. And I'm concerned that somehow we're gonna move in a direction on this where that doesn't happen. And I think that would be a mistake. And
Other questions or? Anything for the applicant?
Just one note, I agree with Bob's notion that he mentioned about the height. And side to give the flexibility on the low street side. So I want the language to restrict that.
So we basically, we would want the language for this overlay district not to reflect a normal, like, you know, this is, we do in our zoning of the. We want to tie into that.
Correct. I presume if there's a planning board report, it might clarify what that, expectation might be to this, what you made today. We can bold this, just parameters of that.
Okay, if there's nobody else at this point who wishes, from the planning board and the city council to ask anything, I would open. The public hearing. Let's open the public hearing. Reopen. the public hearing. Any comments from anybody, please come forward to the microphone. Please identify your name and address and go ahead.
Hi, Amanda Zeller, 6A Noble Street, Newburyport. I was at the last meeting and I did attend a couple other of these meetings to kind of try and understand the language a little bit more than I do as someone who just lives down the block and someone who's not involved in very complicated planning. I want to thank Robert for what he just said about the extreme concern about letting this proceed without more of our say in what it means for Newburyport planning. It's planning. And I want for there to be our voice in the planning, not just a developer who's trying to maximize profit from the space. That's deeply concerning to me. And at our last meeting, I definitely felt heard. But then I was leaving the room and there were comments in the back from people who are highly involved in the planning process. No one's sitting at the table, but people who are highly involved, that made me feel like the meeting concerns were dismissed. This meeting was just about hearing people so they felt like they could get their concerns out. And to me, that hurt because this is my neighborhood that's going to be impacted by this. I already can't pull out of my driveway safely sometimes, and my kids can't be on their bikes and walking safely in this area. So anything that lets us keep this as a safe residential area in the surrounding neighborhoods is very important to me. I've been told through casual conversations, and correct me if I'm wrong, that some of the planning around the roads and the intersections in this area is very difficult to change because of the state nature of that intersection. So my concern lies in, yeah, we're planning parking. Parking is only a tiny part of the problem. It's the traffic. So what can we do to make it safe to be in this area if we don't have a lot of control over the intersections? I'm bounded by two very unsafe intersections right now that I'm told we can't really change to make safe for the people who live. And there are very residential neighborhoods just a few blocks away from this. So in order to satisfy and get us in this safe harbor zone, I'm not willing to sacrifice those residential neighborhoods. And my hardest part about this is based on a transit center that buses don't really run. My husband used to take transportation to work out of that bus station down the street, and some of the bus companies don't run it. You can't get to the airport from that bus. So what is the planning that fits with this being the safe harbor status that we're using it for? I understand it comes under that, but are we truly basing this on traffic management and transportation that actually exists? Or are we trying to use that area as a loop? It gets us into the safe harbor zone at the sacrifice of the safety of the residents around it. That's my concern as a local resident who lives around this. It's a struggle already, and I want us to be part of the plan. I don't want a developer to maximize profits at the sacrifice of the people who live there already. Thank you for listening again, and thank you for having the public at these meetings. And I'm very impressed by the thoughtful conversation I'm hearing at the table tonight, so I appreciate that concern.
Thank you. Else?
Good evening, Juliet Walker, 13 Eagle Street. So last time I was here, you heard me speak about our community's dire need for housing and my general support for taking strategic and transformative action. I think most of the people in this room have expressed that support. Understand that there's a real need for housing creation. So I'm not going to reiterate all that. I do want to take a pause here and just think about what we're rushing to try to do. I do think we need to try to think more holistically about this area. I think there's already a development discussion happening, and I know we're feeling pressured to respond to that. But I don't know how much we can control that in a rush process that's sort of happening for that specific project. I think we need to take a step back and think more holistically about the whole area. Let the development agreement process go forward on a parallel track. I know it's not ideal, but I think it's more realistic, and that we'll have a chance as a community to come together and think about the goals and vision for the area, rather than trying to pigeonhole zoning one little part of this whole area. I'm a planning professional. I write zoning, I interpret zoning, and I find this zoning drafted in front of you tonight very hard to understand. It feels like it's been sort of jigsawed from other parts of the ordinance. No offense to anybody who's written other parts of the ordinance. I know the practitioners do their best. But I just don't really understand what the point of this zoning is in reading it. I don't think we have a clear vision of what we want to try to achieve. And it just, to me, as a planning professional, I don't understand it. I don't really see the vision here, let alone the people who implement it or the people who live around it and trying to interpret. So what I'm encouraging you to do tonight is think about that parallel track. There's an active development proposal that's being considered by the administration. There's conversations around that. We have an idea of what they want to do. Let that conversation continue, but then take a step back, think about this whole area and craft zoning that maybe includes design review, includes pedestrian considerations, that thinks about our overall goals, that allows our community to give input into that, and do that with technical assistance. We have a technical assistance grant from the state. Use that, use the professional guidance, but don't rush to pass something for this little corner of the broader area just because you're feeling that you need to take action. I think you can be more strategic about what you spend your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment on this proposed zoning? Oh, it's good.
Owen Smith, would you like to address the planning board city council?
Can you hear me?
We're not hearing you. Looks like your mic is running, but we're not getting any audio.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, you appear to be unmuted on your end, but we're not getting any audio. Here's the call-in number if you want to.
Okay.
I'm being muted.
It will be coming out of the outline. Yeah. So,
I cycled through it again. Can you hear me?
Owen, address us again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Councilor Hart. The hour was set correctly.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. The transcript was working, but Owen Smith, 175 Story Avenue, Newburyport. Basically, zoning's balancing property owners' rights with the needs of the community. And, there's some lessons learned we can have from the Colby Farm development from 4 years ago that I think we can apply here. Looking at the proposed site plan, the traffic circulation at the site isn't going to change much. That intersection right there at Haji's is going to exist. And, right now, we don't really have the tools in our toolbox to compel the developer to pay to put a traffic signal there. That's another discussion to have with our state reps in the State House about changing what local zoning could require of developers. But in the meantime, we do need to look at the future economic growth that we'd have from this facility, the added tax revenue, and we can balance that to ensuring our infrastructure meets the needs of the future. We've had discussions about water and sewer charging higher connection fees. We could charge higher permitting fees to cover some of these costs that private entities would have that the city has to bear for their development. But in the big picture, if we let this get tied up in litigation and delay it, the city is losing out on tax revenue. And, a lot of the city councilors that are talking about trying to slow this down and put brakes on this process are the first ones to complain about, our tax rate going up. So how do we sustain our city without growth? If you don't grow, you got to put a heavier burden on the residents living here. So I really think we need to look at the big picture here and realize that bringing in people to our community, raising our tax levy, from new development and, covering some of those expenses right now to sustain it is an important thing to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, nobody else wants to be heard on this. We'll close the public comment period and bring it back to the city councilors and the planning.
Well, I think we would like to hear, as Councilor Preston stated, we would like to, hearing part process, and I think we would like to have the opinion written that you all plan on doing it. As soon as you can, so we can continue the work. Or we will continue to have public comment.
So, do you want to close the hearing on your side?
Yes.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Planning board, you want to proceed, close the public hearing and then deliberate about, I guess maybe what we should do is figure out a way to draft an opinion on the side of this meeting. And review it at the next meeting, I guess that will be,
What's your next
the
meeting?
6th.
Chair and I can work together and then we can review it again.
I'd like to follow the call also. Okay,
Our next. If we wanted to review it, get you to, after the 6th. That would have to be a Thursday meeting, if we wanted to bring it up. Be our first council meeting. Or we can just keep our regularly scheduled meeting and handle it.
I unfortunately have a flight at noon on the 7th.
Okay, so we'll take your opinions, your stuff. Sorry, lack of a good word. We'll take your written opinion from your meeting on November the 6th. We'll bring it into our committee and we'll discuss it on November 19th and we'll bring it out.
You guys can start the meeting now.
All right.
okay, could I have a motion then to close the public hearing?
I move that we close the public hearing.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? So what we'll do is we'll have something for the meeting on the 6th, at which point we will adopt the report.
We'll report.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is another joint public hearing on the ordinance related to accessory dwelling. Once. And you have a presentation.
Yes,
Do you want us to, we go up there?
It might make sense. You, the audio is really being.
Okay, I can speak loud. That, although I'm very short, so you can see me. Yeah, so thank you. I think what I was hoping to do, this is our second discussion on this element, and I was really hoping to get into some of the policy conversations. So the things that I think the sponsor and I would like to talk about is a little bit about a recap, going through again the purpose, why are we doing this, and recap kind of what we heard at the first hearing. The second piece is the legal guidance, so it's great to have Attorney North here, because I think that was the outcome from the last meeting. We're having some critical kind of items clarified, discussed, and really understood as we move ahead with how we're going to do the bylaw here. Permit and review triggers, I think those are really important aspects to understand as we try to create that vision of what this will look like for ADUs in single family lots. And then hoping then we can all talk about a little bit like the plan review options or site plan review. That was an area that I know is going to prompt further kind of clarification and understanding. And then finally, public comment. And then I think the sponsor and I would like to continue the hearing on this one. We are not as much in a hurry on, we just want to get it right. So for us, the intention is to start the policy conversation. I'd like to ask the planning and development chair that we actually also, like we did with the PPOD, that we have a committee discussion so we could actually go through some of the ordinance and clarifications and amendments as a body of the council, and then come back to here in this forum and kind of continue and finalizing what our thoughts are around the ordinance. So just to get started, really quickly on the review of the purpose again, the next slide. This was actually really a compelling story. We actually just approved Tuesday night, yesterday, the city council on the housing production plan. And I really just wanted to hone in on a very interesting breakdown of housing in our city. And this is from 2020 versus the number of occupants in housing and the number of bedrooms in housing units. And I think what you'll see here is 66% of the homes in Newburyport are occupied by 1 to 2 people. But 13% of the units in Newburyport are studio 1 bedroom. So what that tells us is that we really do have a mismatch in the size of households and the size of housing units. We wonder, how did we get here? Why are we dealing with this issue in terms of creating smaller housing? This is one of the opportunities, which is why it was in the housing production plan since 2013 that we revised our in-law apartment ordinance from the 80s to actually allow accessory dwelling units as rental. So this kind of gives a little kind of lay of the land of why we are in the situation we are here in Newburyport. And yes, the state has now kind of come forward with regulations, and we all feel like, oh, another state mandate, and we're being told by the state to do something. Well, there's reason, because communities have not been moving the needle. So now on the next slide, I just want to recap from our October 2nd meeting that the current zoning for in-law apartments, I want to emphasize, is from the 1980s. It's outdated, and it will be unenforceable after February 2nd next year. Adopting ADU regulations can then benefit homeowners and also address the gap in smaller size housing needs. For us, the proposed ADU amended ordinance was structured around state regulations, but this final bullet's important. Policy level decisions has to balance the need of more rental units, but we also want to retain character of residential neighborhoods. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish, and why policy decisions that we're hoping to start tonight will help us. With that, the next one now, we'll get right into the details with the legal guidance. And I did start with this, but I also want to acknowledge Director Port has been coordinating with the attorney. So maybe I could let you just take this on you and we can just into it.
Fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah, so again, we have Attorney North here. Thank you. I was going to just sort of summarize briefly for folks, if it's helpful, some of the salient points that Attorney North had spoken to, and 2 communications that she's now given to the City Council and Planning Board in relation to this zoning ordinance. One of which was a question, the first one here, just running through just the list. One was whether or not the state legislature, in using the term single family zoning district, was referring to really the title of a district or what was going on in those districts. And in essence, the state legislature, the interpretation here is that, and I think it's certainly correct in my view, is that because there are so many districts across the Commonwealth, they're titled different things, there's multiple districts in each community that allow single family, that the legislature is really saying anywhere where single family is allowed, any district in which single family is allowed. So we have several districts in the city, some of which are with the acronyms here, CON, meaning Conservation Agricultural District, the R1, R2, R3, those are residential districts. Then those are the types of districts where this accessory dwelling unit allowance, that's the state requirement now, where that would apply. And this is just the baseline of what the state requires. The cities and towns can go beyond that, but that's sort of one of those baseline questions for interpretation. And I obviously have to defer to Karis if you'd like to stand in at any point and correct me on anything or supplement. Principal dwelling, that was another question. What is meant by principal dwelling? That came up, I guess, because a couple of reasons. One is just, the legislature in crafting language, relatively short language, and trying to cover a lot of ground, applying across the Commonwealth, but also recognizing the way that each community defines things slightly differently and looking at our own zoning ordinance. Clarification under the statute of what was meant by principal dwelling and how that might apply here. So in essence, principal dwelling under the statute, the interpretation here that it applies to a single family dwelling. So the state mandate being a mandatory requirement or allowance at the local level for accessory dwelling units, that really applies to a single family dwelling only. It doesn't mean that a community can't go beyond that, in other instances, two family, for instance. But here the statute is really speaking specifically to that scenario. And that's what is the mandatory requirement across the Commonwealth. The other third question was essentially whether or not the way that the statute works is there's a parking allowance, a requirement that you can have for one space per accessory dwelling unit, but you can't require that parking space locally if the property in question is within a half-mile radius of what they consider to be sort of a transit facility. So in this case, our instance, that would be the MBJ commuter rail station. And there was a question about, because of the use of the term bus station in the statute, whether that would apply to what we here call the Tacoma Street parking garage, but was originally constructed with MVRTA funds, Regional Transit Authority, and is utilized by them, and actually has their logo on it, is utilized as one of their station stops. So in essence, the question there was, does it make sense as the best practice to incorporate that now in the zoning and let folks know what that expectation is there? It's a downtown akin to the train station, for instance, as a poor sort of dense area, understandably, but that is a transit location for that purpose, rather than remaining silent on it, leaving it ambiguous, and probably having the state say, yes, we intended that to be one of them because it's part of the Regional Transit Authority's, facilities that they've utilized and funded. So in this instance, the guidance here was that it would be a reasonable best practice to incorporate that now in the ordinance rather than leaving it silent, given the way that the statute is structured. Defer again to Attorney North if you want to add anything or something like that. I think there was an expectation here that some of these other elements, which are a little bit more involved, would be discussed at a later point. In essence, 4 and 5 that you see listed here have more to do with the way in which the permitting is done for the accessory dwelling unit and the degree to which we can regulate it and how that is done essentially, but that's a little bit more involved. So I think that the intent is to discuss that in just.
So, yeah.
Just been doing a lot of homework, so mostly for my fellow counselors as well as many members of the public who are interested. I'm just gonna, can you just go back one slide? Yeah. So number 1 here is saying a single family zoning district. We have R1, which is the only single family zoning district in Newburyport. But what the interpretation of the law is that anywhere where there is a single family home allowed, where there's more than one allowance, you can add an ADU. So it's more broadly applicable in our community, which may be interpreted as a good thing, but something to be aware of. Number 2, on the principal dwelling, this is something where we have interpreted in the current proposed ordinance language to allow an ADU where you may have a 2-family home. You may be able to add what would essentially be a 3rd unit to that property. That is a policy decision that's up for consideration. The last one is pretty cut and dry. So we've isolated the Tacoma garage as a bus station because that is what the law tells us we have to do. What we have done is we've specified that location so that we can't have people claiming that a bus stop is the bus station. So that isolates that. And then to the yellow language, which we will get into, the top 3 were a little bit more straightforward and cut and dry. The yellow stuff, we're going to go into a little bit more detail and show some examples that will hopefully help when we get to the policy questions around that legal guidance.
make it a little easier for us to know what we're talking about from some of the language and options that we have available.
So can we go back to I actually want to just get agreement. We could pause here.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear from fellow counselors here as well as the planning board. In our opinion, as the sponsors, we do, for the first one, you know, like my co-sponsor said, single family zoning district is really R1 if you were to look at just from the use. We had the attorney though tell us that, you know, the state kind of guidance does mean anywhere where single family use is allowed by right. So for us, we feel very comfortable with that interpretation. I want to make sure everyone here is as well. And that's in the table of uses would be that first row, which you know, I think I put in the appendix. And I did it to the appendix here. If people want to see it, what we mean by that. So up to folks, it should be there towards the end, maybe. Oh, no, maybe
Is it
not.
not in there?
No, go scan all the way to the bottom by the appendix.
Yeah, this row right here.
So what we're saying is, so as you can see R1 and you scan down from R1, you know, there's really no other uses except what's a home, a single family home. But as you just heard the attorney, our legal counsel did agree with like just that whole band of red here. And so that's where the sponsor and I also said for accessory dwelling units would be also permitted. Any discussion on that, or can we assume that okay. Am I seeing that? All right. So the second one, principal dwelling, this one is, I would hope to get a little bit more engagement on this one because the current proposed ordinance is a little agnostic. I don't know if that's the right word for it. We don't specify, we really just say the principal dwelling and we don't specify single family, two family. So that was one of the things, but there is a limit of one per lot in the way that the ordinance is written. So if it's a two family home, only one on that lot, even though it's owned by two different people, only one of them would be able to do an ADU. We have to probably arm wrestle for it, but that is one of the kind of limitations in there. Thoughts from the group?
Just to add to that a little bit, the reason there's some confusion is because we have an interpretation that the legislature meant principal dwelling to mean a single family dwelling. Our zoning dwelling includes single family, two family, three family, etc. So our word dwelling in Newburyport zoning does not mean a single family dwelling. So if we were to, so the way this, as you say, agnostic, but it's also basically saying that you can have, the way the ordinance, proposed ordinance is written, you can have an accessory dwelling unit attached to any type of dwelling. And if we want to be very strict, we can insert the words single family to specify. That's really the policy.
And it would also, so the same lot requirements and dimensional requirements would apply. So if you can imagine a two family is generally larger hypothetically than a single family. So the limitation or the applicability will still depend on the ability to put this ADU on the lot in compliance or to receive an exception, which we'll talk more about, but just to sort of spell out that we wouldn't expect a lot of ADUs to be attached to a two-family home, but that if you had a very large lot, you could fit a third unit, it would still be an ADU, it would not be able to be sold as a condo, be subject to all the other requirements, but it would be another rental, home on that property.
If I could, I think this current point, we covered some of the other, something about the zoning administrator, but the point you just raised, I think everybody should understand is, all the dimensional, all the spatial constraints in zoning would still apply. They don't throw out the window, they still apply. So all those spatial constraints that we have in place in order to make sure things are, comfortable with a given neighborhood, those things still apply regardless of whether or not an accessory dwelling unit is allowed under the state statute.
So thoughts from people on keeping it as it is?
Yeah, so going back to the underlying intent of this ordinance is to create more affordable housing, more affordable rental housing. There's a lot of opportunities to increase the number of units if you don't just restrict it to a single. I think, there's a lot, I can think of a lot of instances where you have a, two family, it still meets all the size constraints of that block, case by case basis. And that's really the underlying determination of whether an ADU can be placed there. I think it's just artificial to say it's single family or a multi-family or a two-family. The real criteria for having an ADU is how it fits on the lot. Whether it's a one family or a two family, the overriding concern is how does that use fit on the lot. If it's a one family or a two family, I think it is secondary to how the actual accessory unit is located on. So I would encourage a broader definition on in our ordinance, and not just limit it to.
And actually, we don't right now. So that's the thing. So our current ordinance, that's the proposed amended version, we don't just say single family, but from the legal counsel, principal dwelling was just clarified to mean only single family. And we're not going beyond the state by what we're doing. And I just want to make sure that's okay with everyone. I agree with your thought process though, I do. But I want to make sure we're absolutely up there with everyone here, that this is a little bit beyond the state's intention.
Yeah, so I agree, and I also agree that the use of language as principal dwelling is clear. I actually have a little bit different take on it, the other side of it, actually, again, with the intent here to be able to build, create more housing in a whole. I'm a little stuck on the fact that if I were to live in a two-family and the other side decides to build an ADU first, I just get lost in that, right? So I'd like us to be open to opening the language to allow for the other side. And, I don't know exactly how to fix that in here, but I don't think it's fair. And B, I think it goes against the goal of building more housing. Yeah, I mean, again, especially if they're still gonna have to live within the setback constraints and all of those sorts of things. If both sides can do that, I don't know why we would restrict the other side from the.
So you're thinking more of a townhouse.
Yeah, if you and I lived in.
Where it's separate ownership.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm considering the two family to be under sole ownership.
Yeah, no, but I'm thinking, townhouse. But if I had
I think it's a different.
adequate yards for you and I both could build an ADU. Be frankly upset if you built an ADU and then found out.
I was just gonna say, the state, going back to the state law, if you want to have more than one accessory dwelling unit in a lot, it requires you to allow that through a special permit. So it provides for that, but it's not an as of right accessory dwelling.
Could we not change the language to make it as a right?
And in fact, I think the statute actually indicates that the second would be required to be a special permit, not as a right. So in this case, the statute's already defining that second one as a special permit process, not.
Which I think would make sense. I mean, I think we would want that too. I mean, if you think about one of the concerns with proliferation and, infill, like unintended infill or small scale infill, whatever you might want to call it, I think special permit triggering for a second ADU on a lot, as the state said, does make sense. But it allows for the situation. It's just that they would have to go and, yeah.
Just to respond as well, one thing that's been really helpful to me coming very new to this subject matter is to look at we're going to take you through a couple of real examples. One of them is my house. I think if you can come up with, if you spot an example, Councilor Preston, that is sort of the thing that you're describing, we could certainly take a look at that and talk about what the zoning that we proposed how that would apply and what exceptions, would be available. So that's been super illuminating, which hopefully you'll find to be true.
Anything else on this conversation? Because then we can just move on to the next. Okay. the number 3 was best practice. We could take that amongst counselors. That was a specific question too from some other counselors who aren't here. We'll get to that later. So we just move on. Great. I will turn this over to, I think, Andy or Jennifer, whoever.
Yeah, sure. I'll speak to this. So, Special Permit Granting Authority, just to clarify what the permit process is today, and how things typically work. And this goes a little bit to the question of, who ends up being the designated permit granting authority for something, and whether it's accessory dwelling units or otherwise. But one of the things we often need to consider is who is the permit granting authority that jurisdiction is assigned to. Originally in the zoning ordinance, a lot of things were assigned to the zoning board of appeals. Over time, the city has added some permits, and some of those newer permits have been assigned to the planning board over time. But there is, generally speaking, I think, a distinction generally. So this slide is essentially summarizing that. One thing to note is that the planning and zoning staff, actually our zoning administrators, we're lucky enough to have with us here this evening, reviews all the building permits that are issued throughout the city. This is and I want to thank the mayor and city council, prior mayor, and current mayor, city council over the years. Having created this position, I think improperly to distinguish zoning decisions from building commissioner decisions, that's something that takes a lot of bandwidth on its own. So here we have somebody, a professional, who is always looking at all the permits that are being issued throughout the city and making sure that they're compliant with zoning. So that's something that to know right off the bat. That's irrespective of whether or not something is sent to a board for review. But generally speaking, the two options of boards are the zoning board of appeals and the planning board. And just to summarize briefly, and it's helpful here to understand as we're thinking about what we might assign a new permit jurisdiction authority to, whether it's here or elsewhere. The zoning board of appeals typically has residential districts, and what's going on in that small scale residential that's happening there. One exception to that would be what we call section 6C. We use Roman numerals still. We're going to be changing that, but Roman numerals. So section 6C is really dealing with two separate single family home structures being given on built on a lot where 2 families allowed, but not as a 2-family structure, 2 independent single family homes. So the landowner gets a little bit more benefit out of that option there, but there's some exchanges, some public benefits that are offered in exchange for that. And that's at the board's discretion based on the given instance. But that's relatively speaking an anomaly. Most of the, that's a relatively small amount of permit that's happened over the years. Most of it is properly before the zoning board of appeals. The planning board typically has different qualitative areas. Downtown overlay district, it was relatively recently assigned as sort of a core commercial area or mixed use. Smart growth district, similar in nature down by the train station. And then there are some select uses in the business park that are oftentimes subject to site plan review. So it actually kind of makes sense to only send an applicant to one board rather than sending them for the special permit to the ZBA and the site plan approval to the planning board. That can be frustrating and really nonsensical. Then the other thing is large scale residential. So other than that 6C that I mentioned, which is small, relatively infrequent and somewhat of an anomaly in residential districts, it's the large scale residential. So those are the subdivisions like Evergreen Commons that we saw, Colby Farm Lane, Oleo Woods, things like that. Larger scale residential subdivisions, that's something the planning board typically looks at. So, and like I said, section 6C. So not typically generally looking at small scale residential. And I mentioned that here only because as we talk about ADUs, that's essentially a small scale residential. It can only be 900 square feet in size anyway. And it's the largest, and it's already, the way it's structured in the statute, it's accessory to the primary residential use. So again, this is really extending off of the singular, residential use that's already happening there in that context. So just some general context for how things are done right now. The proposed ADU amendment right now, as it's drafted right now, without any further revisions, would assign that authority to the planning board, the special permit granting authority status to the planning board, with the presumption that they might also be looking at site plan approval in some instances.
Yeah, and the reason for that as sponsors, as I think 6C is what, where you have a 2-family structure on a lot where 2 families allowed. And part of it was thinking, well, is this like a 6C? But I see the difference, with the small scale ownership probably is not a consideration with ADUs. The owner does not have to be on site, but the ADU has to, it could be allowed to be a rental, or it allows for it to be rented. I should say it that way. The she sheds and the man caves, those could still happen, but.
Right, but most notably, it cannot be sold off.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. Whereas in the 6C, that is exactly what happens.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a very good distinction. So I want to get the planning board and my fellow councilors together.
So I would advocate strongly that it goes to the zoning board. I think that's exactly where it belongs. small scale residential. It's the planning board by its nature requires more, for an applicant requires more expenses to go through your planning process. I think somebody, as a individual could probably get through the zoning board of appeals without an engineer, without an attorney. And so, that's why I think that it belongs with the zoning board of appeals.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. Planning board members, you guys agree with that?
I agree.
Yeah.
I think the ZBA has more familiarity with the neighborhoods and the scale of project that is being discussed, so I agree.
I guess my feeling also is that a lot of the special permits that might come out of this for detached accessory dwelling unit will be of the same type that would be for accessory garage or something like that. It could be like a special permit for non-conformity, that type of thing. So these are the things that zoning board would keep.
And like variants, they would get the variance.
Right. So I think it's more streamlined.
Thank you. We're just cruising along here. Okay, let's keep going. I think there's this the now. Oh yeah, now we get to look at examples. Whose house is that?
We've been lucky enough, our sponsors have been nice enough to allow us to use their to show dimensionally and spatially what can happen on lots. We have to.
So this slide up here is actually to speak to accessory structures generally, not accessory dwelling units. And I guess just to start to say that as an administrator, I do review every project that comes before me for compliance with setbacks, with lot coverage, and send it to the appropriate board based upon what I see relative to the design standards that are applicable. So for an accessory structure, be it a garage, a she shed, a workshop, something that is, associated with the primary structure, but not an ADU. This illustration shows the build box, as we call it, for the setback lines. And then it shows a freestanding accessory structure that could be built. If it meets the setbacks and it meets the lot coverage, you just go get a building permit. There's no additional review process. We see a lot of those on these larger lots that meet the design standards. Sometimes people would come in and they'd say, I really can't put it right there because there's a giant boulder or wetland in the middle of my lot where I might put it, and so I need to locate it where this red box is. And they come in for a variance from the ZBA or something like that. But again, these are, one is by right, the one requires a ZBA special or a variance, but that's the end of it. There's not an additional level of site plan review. Next slide.
If I could, it is part of the context, I think it's helpful, but if I could, is partly because the spatial relationship and where these building footprints can go is defined by the setbacks that we're looking at here. So as we think about site plan review, we think about, does that mean that we're talking about where the building footprint goes? Probably not, because those things are already adequately defined by the zoning, dimensional standards in this build box that we see here.
Hey, can I ask, accessory structures, garages, carriage houses, pool houses?
Sheds, anything that is customarily associated with a primary dwelling unit or dwelling units. So it doesn't mean, an accessory structure, you might have a personal workshop in it, but that doesn't mean you're running your business out of it. That becomes a different type of use. You might have a bonus room out there, where you watch movies, but you can't put, at least under our current zoning, you can't actually put an in-law apartment out there. You cannot put a complete living unit out there. And as you presented it, the accessory dwelling unit ordinance says that if you were to take an accessory structure that was built as a garage and put a complete dwelling unit in it, that recharacterizes it. And now all of a sudden it has to comply with the rules for the accessory dwelling unit and not those just a baseline accessory dwelling, accessory structure. Okay. So
here we have two lots. The one on the left, although they're shown at the same size, the one on the left is probably 4 times the size.
We did this just to make sure you could see it on the screen.
But to be, you know, to look at this, we wanted to talk about the types of ADUs that exist. And 2 of them are either attached, they're called attached, or interior. And the blue box is showing one that would be created entirely within the space of the existing dwelling unit. And then the orange box is contemplated expansion thereof. These would all have to be under the minimum square footage as allotted by the state statute. But that said, if you were to make an expansion, as illustrated by the orange box on either of these properties, and it complied with all of the dimensional controls, it could be made at the red box that you see represents, on both properties, is a detached ADU. It's a standalone unit, complete dwelling unit. This too would have to meet the dimensional controls, but it has to meet the dimensional controls for the primary dwelling unit that it's associated with. So if it's a 1-family property, it has to meet the 1-family standard. If it's a 2-family property, it has to meet the 2-family standards. Now that's true of lot coverage as well. And as you can see, there's a lot more room or open space on the left-hand image. On the right-hand image, all of a sudden it becomes really hard to squeeze a freestanding unit. And Councilor Dean, I think it was last time, asked, how do we monitor this sort of dense infill created on the right-hand side? And the answer to that is any additional lot coverage that would go on a lot that's scaled like the one on the right-hand side is going to automatically trigger a special permit for nonconformities review by the Zoning Board of Appeals or the Planning Board, depending on what the decision is. But typically it would be the Zoning Board of Appeals. And that's going to be the case of most of the properties, you know, that are scaled like this, these 4,000 square foot lots and things like that. So there will already be a pretty high level of regulation and review process associated with both the freestanding units and even many of the attached units. Because that attached unit, although it meets dimensional controls, it exceeds the allowable lot coverage in these dense neighborhoods.
And so you're talking the one on the right.
I am talking the one on the right.
So the one on the right, because it's already a non-conforming
It's-
structure.
It's non-conforming structure, so if you were to build on top of it, you're gonna be doing an upward extension, and that's going to trigger review. If you're going to build behind it where that orange box is, it's going to trigger lot coverage, you know, an exacerbation of a non-conforming lot coverage, so that's going to trigger review. Essentially, anything you put on that property, many properties like this, is going to trigger review regardless of the conversation that I think you're going to go to, which is site plan review or not site plan review. And I think in the case on the left, where the red box meets the dimensional controls that are, you know, we've looked at these carefully to sort of say this gives enough space to allow, you know, neighbors appropriate setbacks. The massing is controlled by the maximum height. So that box could be built, you know, if it were just a standard accessory structure like a garage, that could just be built without site plan review. And it is up to you guys here to discuss whether or not you think that simply locating an accessory unit within that structure is enough to sort of trip that threshold and say it needs to be a different.
Any questions from folks on that element? I do want to follow up, but go on, anyone?
It's not a question, but it's actually an observation that I think you just clarified for me. So in the case of basically 90% of the lots, except that, say, they're all going to require a special permit, which is a much higher level of discretionary review than the site plan. So you're going to, in the case of those types of lots, and I think we're not quite at that discussion yet, but just leaping ahead, In the case of those types of lots, site plan review doesn't add anything because you've already got special permit.
I'm not going to, we currently don't do that kind of review for a similar expansion that doesn't contain an ADU. A similar expansion to a 1 or 2 family home would get quite a high level of review simply through the ZBA special.
I think I can speak to that, having seen numerous types of permits and how things work over the years. I mean, that there, to your point, it would definitely not add anything because the special permit authority is much greater, has much more discretion in it and to how things are resolved, one way or the other, whether it's approved or not, and all that. So some result, yes, the site plan review would not really add anything in those. The site plan review doesn't have anything.
I will say that the initial review that would be done for any project, before we even get to what board level review is going to look at, is parking accommodated? Is the height consistent with zoning? Are the setbacks? So all of that happens regardless of what board anyone, thinks that they should go to.
Okay, no, I think that's helpful. I think from our perspective, the site plan review detached, and I think we'll get to it a little bit later. A lot of it has to do with massing, privacy, but we could talk about it. So I think this kind of leads to the good kind of, I guess, segue into the next area. So if you want to, I think this was the other thing, because as we're trying to figure out, okay, site plan review, we hear it, we know it happened. This was helpful. I thank Director Port for putting together and Jennifer Blanchet about what are the current areas that we have planning, and only planning board's the only, I guess, entity that does site plan review. It's not something that the ZBA does, it's just the planning board. And here are the examples of currently what triggers site plan review. And did you want to talk through those?
Yeah, I would just mention briefly a little bit like we spoke to a second ago, as the councilor mentioned, and as I spoke to a few minutes ago. This is something that's required for larger scale projects typically, so 5 or more units. So one of the questions here is we have a sort of an imbalance here between calling for site plan review possibly for an accessory dwelling unit to a primary residential, it's accessory to that primary, where we don't require it for 2 family, 3 family, 4, we get to 5 units, then we require it again. So, what makes sense here in context, that might be raised here as sort of a question, but generally speaking, as currently the ordinance works, it's multifamily, 5 units or more. We've got this commercial industrial uses, 1,000 square feet or more. In this case, the ADU itself, with accessory dwelling unit only 900 square feet. The difference, the second piece of the slide is just the difference between major and minor review. There might have been some misunderstanding or misconception before. Minor site plan review does not in the ordinance require a butter's notice. It does require a public board meeting where that's reviewed, but it does not require a butter's notice for the major project, which is typically that section is largely dealing with these, as the planning board dealt with it over the years, mainly larger, projects in the city that are happening. And there's a reason, because of the larger scale impact of those projects to expect, the public hearing, butter notice and so forth. The question here is, on the scale, what is appropriate scale to the portion of the proposed here for, type of development?
So if we continue on the ZBA track, you just mentioned that in areas where the lot coverage is impacted, comes a special permit. With a special permit, there is a butter notification, correct?
Correct.
So anytime you get tripped up with any of those components, you're going to get full abutter review, which for me, again, puts me further in the camp of the ZBA process. Where so there wouldn't be site plan review necessary, because that's not something the ZBA does. But most of the lots in the report are going to be at some impact to the lot coverage, unless they're enormous, and then the abutters don't really have the issue because the lots are big, within the confines of, without any site.
And I would also say, you point out here, the difference between major and minor is whether they have a butter notice. There's also whether you have a butter comment. because with a minor site plan review, which is what is currently written in the draft ordinance, you don't have the kind of ability for the public to come to a meeting, they can come to a meeting, but they don't have the right to come during the meeting. And so the major site plan review is similar to this kind of meeting, the public has the right to comment. But that's not being proposed, and that would be way outside the way we do the site plan review right now. So, your point, again, if you're the great majority of those lots in the denser parts of the city would likely require a special permit. And so, to my way, site plan review doesn't add anything, and it would mean going to computer.
Well, let's move to the next, because we're kind of honing in onto our last, I think our last slide is this one, right? This is the last one.
Yes. Yeah.
So here's the policy decision, because, yeah, go on.
Just to add real quick, so thank you, Councilor Ray, helped us, they teed this up perfectly, but one of the things that we glossed over several slides back was a yellow box that had some words in it. Those words were also part of the legal guidance we received from the city solicitor. Two of the pieces of that are in question. They're a little bit less cut and dry than the top three that we talked about, involve objective standards, which, our intention had been to provide, a public process for a detached unit and some standards and things. However, the legal guidance, which Attorney North will correct me if I get wrong, is, includes some question about what are objective standards that we thought we might accomplish through a site plan review versus what are some objective standards we as counselors might include within the ordinance that would be in line with what the state statute has seen and allowable in the state statute. That could be accomplished through a ZBA process, for example. And then,
Oh, if we don't have something.
yeah, the second one was, site plan review specifically could be interpreted as disparate treatment of a single family unit, where you can build a house, it doesn't have to go through site plan review, but you want to build an ADU, and we're imposing this more stringent review process, where we might be able to accomplish that through the ZBA, as Councilor Wright has kind of talked about. So sorry, take it away. I just wanted to make sure we didn't gloss over some of that legal feedback.
No, that was great. Thank you. So our last, just to kind of wrap it up, and really was, and as sponsors, we're really open to getting it right. Going back to that last point when I kicked us off is, balancing. We're trying to balance the need for creating the housing, but we also want to balance what does it mean for neighborhoods. And so it was really helpful for us to ask ourselves, what's the intent? What do we want to make sure a plan review, that, when you talk about site plan, you really look at the site itself. Is this a viable place for building? But what's the intent with a plan review when you're developing a detached ADU, which is what we honed in on for the site plan? And for me, and I think for the co-sponsor, the privacy element, screening seemed to be an area that seemed also addressed. It wasn't outside the norm of being done. I think when we were watching some other communities and trying to tackle this issue, the placement of windows and balconies, those are a couple of ones, but I want to know from others here too, and other counselors, and Counselor Granis is out there too, but what are some things that a plan review would give us, with being ward counselors, and what else are the things that we want to make sure, like a plan review standards should have? Then we could talk about the agent or the board. We have planning board. Right now, number one is how we currently have the proposed amended ordinances that, per legal review of a current SPR, site plan review criteria, which we've been told by the legal counsel is too subjective. But right now, that's where we have planning board with the existing SPR criteria and standards. We could also have for the planning board, go and edit what we put together and make them less subjective and try to make them objective, edit it in the ordinance. Or the third one is just like how we have the planning and zoning staff that we could codify in the bylaw here and spell it out specifically, that detached ADUs must do this and create that list. It's codified. Now, who's the one that's gonna check it? Well, it's the planning and zoning staff. It's Jennifer Blanchard. You know, that's another path. So those are the three. I don't know if we're missing any, but this is again, the policy aspect that we're looking forward to having and hearing from the planning board. We do want to do our own, I think, planning and development committee too, to get all the councilors there.
So you're looking for feedback on the
Yes.
green text.
And what else to add to that list in green? I mean, we had things like excessive noise, which we do have a noise ordinance, and also Attorney North was like, what? And then some of the other things we also had, it has to be comparable to the neighborhood, like other properties, you know, what's comparable. You know, we kind of, you know, we had something with exterior stairs, like if you're gonna have stairways going upstairs, like think of a garage with a unit on top. And if you have stairs, then you should, they have to be enclosed. You cannot have exposed exterior stairs. And actually, I walked by in a neighborhood where there is one with exterior exposed stairs, but it's interesting that that increases the massing when you enclose it. So we have to think, you know, what's our intent? Are we trying, I know massing is a big thing. We don't want like excessively big structures. So we have to be careful what we're putting in here and the consequences.
If I could offer there, just again, just, you know, planning director, seeing some of the processes that we, you know, we see over time, what works, what doesn't, what makes sense, what doesn't, and obviously offering the best of my ability, what I think might be helpful. Not to say that either myself or the zoning administrator want to take on more work, for instance, but to make a distinction perhaps for yourselves between 2 and 3, I do think it's worth just, you know, understanding or asking the question, if the requirements themselves have to be objective regardless of who is doing that, this is basically going back to what the statute was intending, what the legislature intended, and what will come out. The guidance from the state, I'm sure. If the guidelines that have to be followed here, whatever the criteria standards are, have to be objective. Similar to the question that Rick had asked earlier, what do we gain by having a site plan review if the special permit, for instance, is already figured that's a regular review, for instance? To me, there's a similar question. What is the additional process to say, for instance, in fairness to our volunteer boards, what does the general public get? What does the applicant get? What do these boards get? Having additional applications, you know, sent to them where they have to basically come to the same conclusion, presumably based on objective standards. Either it meets those objective standards or it doesn't. And so I think it's worthy at least asking the question, will you have the ability to send something to a board versus staff that can, you know, review something that's provided by the ordinance? If the board is essentially to abide by those same criteria and can't make up new ones on the fly, it seems to be at least worthy of the question, does it benefit, you know, anybody to have the board have to add that to their agendas and look at those items for an individual accessory dwelling unit when the board also is spending time on things like revising zoning or large development projects and things like that. So again, leave that to you, of course, and the policy choice, you know, the council and whatever. But I just don't know myself whether or not there's a substantial additional benefit if those guidelines are objective and not that it's subjective criteria. A lot more discretion on the part of the to you know, adapt to a given scenario and, you know, special conditions and whatnot.
So, if I could weigh in just quickly, one person's objective standard is not the same as another person's objective standard. And so, when you include those, you include opportunities for disagreements and litigation. So, so I'd be very careful in developing those, keeping in mind that the whole underlying concept of ADUs is permission by right. So if you add too many objective standards, you go further and further away from having it by right. So that's, you know, that's my feedback on it.
Well, thank you. This is good. And I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything and then.
I just have one comment, one concern. If the intent is to apply different standards to the ADU, separate from the principal dwelling unit on the site, particularly with those. If we don't restrict that, and I'm not aware that we do building a single site, I would not be restricting window locations, balcony locations. I think it's tough to apply that standard to an ADU when on a very tight site, you may have a single family house that creates the same situation. So I don't think you can get that specific. If we're not that specific with you.
The primary.
So I guess I have a little bit different take. So, so I guess I think about what standards, what objectives, concerns, the standards might be trying to address. I would think they would have to do with and any impact on the abutting neighbors, and imagining a two-story carriage house that is not occupied versus a two-story carriage house that is converted to an accessory dwelling unit with a new family in it. I think that's a very different impact to building property, especially if that existing carriage house is right up against the property line, so it doesn't need setbacks. But let me just finish. So it doesn't meet current setbacks. I think it's fair to say, at least to consider, having a screening, some type of screening for the new residential unit that you're creating. You know, if we don't even allow that, then there's no point in having any standards, really, because that's really seems to me the privacy issue is the one issue that could be a concern for a new residential unit.
I think there's two scenarios. One is, if it's the diagram where you meet all of the setback requirements, and it's purely as of right.
Yeah.
And I think
I agree, yeah.
there are any new rules that you should apply. If it's a special permit, then everything mitigation measures should be looked at on a case by case. So, I think it's two different things. What I was saying is in the baseline situation, I don't think you should apply. If you don't meet the baseline standards, then every situation is different. The zoning board deals with
Very helpful, so.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in summary, I think, to your point, Andy, about, you know, the quality of the review, it starts with a great quality review and filter of what's being requested. And then the zoning board of appeals has all the skills they need to review what we're talking about here. And then if it gets kicked back as a special permit requirement, then that would naturally flow. I think that makes great sense. It's not overly redundant. It gives someone a better shot at it, getting, you know, evaluated before they spend any money or they do any of all those other things that they have to do. So I think it's a great idea.
We're set and,
We can open up public comment.
yes.
Anybody wish to speak to this, the issue of this proposed amendment, please come forward, give your name and address. Say your piece. Nobody? You're good. Okay, we're close to public comment. Okay, so how do we want to?
Is there anyone online?
No.
You had mentioned earlier that you wanted to continue the public hearing.
Well, I guess, this went very smoothly, so I think we're okay with it, closing, yeah. Or continuing.
So if I may make it, you know, give you some context. I think it's appropriate now for us to take the feedback, as the council. Take the feedback we've had tonight and move it to a planning and development conversation, similar to what we did with.
Yeah.
With the other. So I would recommend on our part that we close our portion of the public hearing, the planning board's welcome to follow their process. Yeah, But by closing it now for us, we just move it to the city council and we'll have opportunities for public input as we move forward in the planning.
Yeah. Getting a report from the planning. I think it'd be
Perfect. Yeah, we're good with that.
Yes,
So is there a motion?
so moved.
Oh, wait, 1 second.
I guess sorry, excuse me, I'll stand up. Was wondering, I thought the original comment and in parallel to how you did the PPOD was to come back with some revisions for further comment from the planning board and perhaps your committee before you closed. And so, not that I'm trying to keep you all in public hearing for too many nights, but that's what I thought you were thinking about doing and
We were, and actually, I'm glad you reminded me, because we are gonna come with a revised draft. And I think that does make sense to have once more in the public and get time to respond. And thank you for reminding, and we did that also with the Peapod. There was a revision, and that way the public and you guys could see how we restructured it. So, and again, we're not on a major time crunch with this one, so I do like that.
Yeah, I'm fine either way.
Yeah.
And I think that we had been envisioning returning on the 20th, November 20th.
Yeah.
Because that
November 20th? Wow.
was,
Yeah, I think it,
we were skipping one meeting.
yes, we're skipping meeting and that way we could meet then.
And that worked. Did that meeting, date work for your committee?
Well, if we are closing this on the 20th, you have a meeting in between that, but we would not be voting at that meeting for you all. Or not be voting on December.
You both are here, we'll keep our here.
No,
No, we're
we'll
gonna
keep
keep
ours.
If you go- So you will be back.
Yes, we schedules allow.
Yes.
So continuance on both parts.
Yeah.
So would you like a motion to continue?
Second. You, all those in favor of continuing the public hearing on ADU November 20th, say aye.
And save it for the planning board. Okay, so motion and second to continue to the November 20th. Those in favor? Any opposed?
Motion to adjourn.
Aye.
Um,
Yeah, that did make sense. Excellent. You might. They still have a hearing.
You guys.
You have a hearing.
This is so much fun, but I think I'll go somewhere else. Stop, put some language.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing for the city of Newburyport, 59 Low Street, major site plan review. Welcome.
Thank you. I know it's been a long night, we'll try to keep our presentation as short as possible, but thank you. I'm Kim Turner, Manager of Special Projects in the Mayor's Office, and we're here tonight to do the site plan review, major site plan review for 59 Low Street. Next slide, please. I have our entire design team here with me tonight. We have Scott Paul, the architect, EGA architect. We have Diane Gagnon, the assistant city engineer. We have Wayne Emerald, the director of DPS online. So I will go through as much of this as I can, and if there are questions for anyone on our team, we're all here tonight. So we'll start with a brief introduction. I'll go over the project and the project details, and then there'll be plenty of time at the end. So just to give you a brief history of this property, of the project, the property was acquired from the National Guard in 2022. It was the former emergency management building for the city of Newburyport, 2.17 acre site on Low Street, directly across from the Knockmolin School. The city council approved a zoning amendment in June of this year to allow a community center use within the I-1 industrial zone within 500 feet of an existing school. That means this parcel now the wetlands were last flagged in 2022. They were confirmed by the Conservation Commission through an RDA. And I'm happy to let you know that on October 8th, we had an order of conditions approved from the Conservation Commission for the project, as you will see it tonight. Design concepts for the rec center were developed with input from many stakeholders, including the Department of Youth and Recreation Services, the administration, parents in the community members and council members through many meetings and public presentations and hearings as well. Right now, we're at a point where the city council is looking for hard bid pricing in order to decide how to proceed, which is why we have a notice of intent and review to get through the permitting stage so that we can issue this for bid and get that pricing before city council to determine how to move forward. Next slide. This is just how the approved wetlands doesn't have a lot of information on it, but you can see that a big section of the south and western portion of the is restricted through wetlands and buffer zones. And again, we have that order of conditions approved the Conservation Commission. Next slide, please. I'm actually, Andy, going to have you go to the following slide.
Oh, sure. And by the way, just to say that, you just say next up.
Okay, thank you. So I'll give you a broad overview of what we're planning to do here, and then we'll break it down into the sections for your review, and I can go into greater detail. But overall, we're looking to repurpose the existing building, which is that gray rectangle at the top of the plan here. That's the old emergency management building. It's 5,700 square feet. We're looking to repurpose that for office and program space for the department. We're keeping the existing CMU walls inside the building and just reusing the spaces as they are, with some walls, which I'll let the architect go over in a few minutes, for programming space. We're then proposing to add a modular gym, which is that angled portion of the building, as well as an interstitial space, that new addition, which will contain both the lobby and all the toilets that are required by code. So really trying to minimize the addition and use as much of the existing building with a modular gym to encompass all of the programming needs. The parking we are showing here is 23 spaces, including 2 accessible spaces. We've designed the configuration of the parking to have a one-way circulation, vehicular circulation, which allows for ease of drop-off for parents dropping children and picking children up from the facility. And then additionally, on the rest of the site, we have a rear courtyard space, which contains a half sport court, a patio space with a shade structure, and primarily as much open lawn, unprogrammed open lawn as possible for children to run and play. Additionally, at the top of the drawing there, you can see a linear play space that is directly connected to an internal space that is dedicated towards the younger children, so they have their own completely fenced-in play space on the northern side of the building. And we'll go into this in greater detail, but we also have safety improvements for traffic, including some curb extensions, striping, signage, and a crossing beacon, which I'll show a little of this we're going to be proposing there. Next slide, please. So you go to the next one. Yeah, thank you. the landscape buffer here was, pretty important to the design concept overall in the site plan review. Number one, all of the existing trees on the site will remain. There's not existing trees on this site per se, but immediately to the north, there's a pretty dense canopy of existing trees that will all remain in this scenario. We're proposing 5 red oaks along Low Street that will separate the parking from Low Street. And then additionally, another red oak and 2 flowering dogwood to satisfy the parking lot planting of 1 tree per 10 contiguous spaces. Additionally to those canopy trees, we're proposing an additional 9 trees in the back of the building, plus pretty extensive plant list of native shrubs and perennials, both at the planted stormwater basin as well as the rain garden at the existing, right there, the chain link fence. The plantings here are really meant to both prevent foot traffic into the wetland, but also improve the ecological functionality and the stormwater treatment of the site. So it's an mitigation effort that the Conservation Commission reviewed with us. And then finally, there's 3 arborvitae planted around the dumpster space at the end of that hammerhead there to try to block and buffer the dumpster from view. Next slide, please. I'm actually gonna have you flip to this one now. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, this is a blow up of the traffic and safety improvements that we're proposing here. We had a consultant TEC take a look at this and provide conceptual recommendations for improving vehicular and pedestrian safety here. So a few things I'd like to point out. Number one, we're proposing a new curb extension on the Knock-Mullen side of Low Street that will both shorten the distance of the crosswalk to get directly to this facility, but also truncate that parent drop-off bay that's right there adjacent to the Knock-Mullen school. All of the crosswalks will have accessible curb ramps. So there's actually those yellow boxes you're seeing there. There's 6 of them. We're also proposing new striping along the frontage of the property. And most importantly, a new overhead beacon that will be push button controlled. TEC noted that the striping should be 24 inches wide for the stop lines and stop signs near the pedestrian hybrid beacon, and a 12-inch stop line and stop sign at the drive, as well as additional signage for do not enter navigation and school signs. Next slide, please. And then we flip to the one afterwards. Thank you. So just to review the parking again, as I said, there's 23 parking spaces here, including 2 handicap accessible that are close to the existing building. We felt in discussions with the department that the 23 spaces were going to satisfy the needs of the department and their programming. The reason being there's 3 sort of primary times that we see switch over of users in this building. In the early morning, we have what's called early ed programming for the children that are earlier than kindergarten or preschool age. Those programs are limited to 12 families. So at maximum, you would have 12 cars for the users plus 10 staff. So we have a total of 22. We have 23 here on site. After school, primarily their users are middle school and high school students who are accessing this facility by walking across the street from the Knock-Mullen school, and parents dropping off or picking up. So really, they're just using that one-way circulation route and dropping off their child or picking up their child. And then after hours, when there could be larger community meetings, parent speakers, basketball leagues, that sort of thing. The idea is if we had more parking than the 23 that we are accommodating on site, that we could share the parking across the street with the Knock-Mullen school, because by that time the school would no longer be in session. I've already discussed the one-way circulation for ease of drop-off and pickup. We also are meeting the current zoning requirement of one parking space for 100 square feet of floor space. And then the last thing I want to note on this plan is that we have indicated that parking spaces 1 and 2, which are when you come in off of Low Street, yep, right there, those 2 that are closest to Low Street, and then also parking spaces 20 and 21, which are closest to the dumpster, would be for staff only, so that we wouldn't have conflicts with parents coming in and out of those spaces. It would be staff that would be there the duration of the day, and they wouldn't be, and I believe I am going to hand this over to Scott.
Good evening, I'm Scott Hall from EGA Architect. I'm going to just briefly go over sort of the exterior design of the building, give you some sense of what we were trying to accomplish. In the rendering up on the screen, the existing building is on the right-hand side of the building, and we're doing very minimal work on the exterior. We're just cleaning it up. Bringing in new electrical and water services. There will be new highly energy efficient windows installed. There'll be triple pane curtain wall windows throughout. They'll all be fixed, non-operable, so that we can control air coming in and out of the building for energy purposes, so that we can try and move towards the net zero energy ordinance that the city has adopted. In the center of the building is the 1-story addition. It's primarily aluminum curtain wall again on the front of the building as well as on the back of the building, so that we create as much natural light coming into the main entry of the building. And then on the left side, you can see the modular gym. We've used colors to try and break up the structure. At the bottom, we have a red color to harken back to the brick on the original building. We will have panels in the center that will be vertical siding, and then the red pilaster strips in between to sort of break up the structure and not make it look so massive. And then at the top of the building, we've got a course of charcoal colored siding that sort of ties in with the the trim on the existing building, which we'll be painting a charcoal colors. On the next slide. This is just a little bit more detail on the existing building. On the image in the upper right corner, that's the rear of the existing building, and there's some windows that are currently there that are about 40 inches wide and 40 inches tall. And so what we're going to do is use those existing openings, but cut the CMU and the brick down to the existing slab so that we can create large window openings with southern light that'll come into what is called the hangout space, which is the primary activity space and meeting space in the building. In the image in the center of the building, there's a couple of garage door bays that are existing. So what we're doing is, again, infilling those with curtain wall structures to allow a lot of natural light to come into the building and take advantage of those existing large openings that already exist. And then on the image at the bottom of the screen, again, that's sort of the other side of the existing building. And we're again just making use of the existing window openings, infilling those with highly energy efficient windows. And then on the left side, you can sort of again see the modular building modular gym in the background there. Again, the colors are trying to tie into what we have going on in the existing. For the exterior lighting, we have installed lighting around the perimeter of the building primarily just for egress purposes. We're trying to keep it fairly minimal. The exterior will not be used at nighttime. At least in the back. So it's really just emergency lighting for egress purposes. So there's a small fixture at the top there that will be located around the perimeter of the existing building to allow light up the egress path from the rear of the building. The light there in the center, there's 3 of those fixtures that will be mounted on the front of the gym and on the side of the gym to help light up the parking lot. And then there will be 3 pole mounted lights at the bottom that will be in the parking lot area to provide a nice even lighting level throughout the parking lot. We did include a photometric analysis in the package that we submitted, and it meets the current requirements in the city ordinance. And Diane will come up now.
Hi, Diane Gagnon, Assistant Engineer, Newburyport. I worked on the stormwater report for this project. We did submit a full report, and that was reviewed by a third party and approved. So I'm just going to give you a little analysis of the existing and proposed conditions. So currently, the site is very, very flat. We have wetlands towards the back and a drainage ditch along Low Street. Any stormwater coming off Low Street north of the site enters the roadway ditch and through a head wall, a 24-inch stormwater pipe that runs all the way to just before the charter school at Perry Way. And additionally, we have about half of the site, the existing building, existing parking and gravel area. That area flows towards the front of the site where there is a small swale that runs along the southern border perimeter of the site against the Armory property. That flows into an existing catch basin right before Low Street. And that ties into that 24-inch drainage pipe that I mentioned earlier, and that goes down to Perry Way. And then the remainder of the site, what we have in the rear, that all flows towards the back, towards the existing wetland, and that ultimately ends up in the drainage swale systems that we have throughout the industrial park and up to the Little River out in the back. The proposed conditions, we are trying to keep it similar to what is existing today. We will have to move the head wall out on Low Street further north just to accommodate the entrance to the parking. So that will continue to catch the roadway drainage from north of the site. And that will continue as it does today down to Perry Charter School. The parking lot area is broken into a couple sections. We have the majority of the parking and some of the sidewalks that will flow over the parking lot itself and into a water quality unit at the exit of the site. Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yep, a little further down, kind of in the pavement. Yep. And then where we have parking adjacent to the grass island along Low Street, that area flows into that grass area, so it'll naturally drain through there and to a catch basin that also ties into Low Street. And then in the southern area of the property, we have that parking flows into what we're going to recreate that drainage swale and into the existing catch basin. So all that, as it does today, out into the drainage pipe on Low Street and onto Perry Way. And for the rear of the property, we're going to capture the drainage from each of the existing structure and the proposed new structures, as well as the patio area and the proposed basketball court. And all of that drainage will flow through a gutter system or over the patio itself into either the planted stormwater basin or piped to the rain garden out back. that will provide for both storage and treatment for this water before it heads out into the wetlands out back. And each of these systems were examined for both pre-existing conditions and proposed conditions in a 2 and 10 and a 100-year storm. So your post will be less than the pre-existing condition that there are out there today. So the existing conditions, we don't really have any sort of treatment or control of the stormwater that's out there. So all of these systems implemented will just provide for control and treatment to the stormwater from this. That pretty much sums up what we were gonna present to you tonight, and I'd like to open it up for questions.
Questions?
Yeah, question. I'm just wondering, you mentioned the 4 staff parking spaces. Are there more than 4 staff members?
There are 10 staff members.
Sure.
So when I said in the morning, the maximum amount of families that they accommodate for the morning programming is 12. And so that plus the 10 staff, if all 10 staff were to drive there, would give us 22 parking spaces, and we're showing 23.
Second, on the diagram, you show the crosswalk across Low Street from the Knockmollen into the island, separating the parking and so forth. And the entrance, the new entrance is directly up across the parking. I'm assuming all the kids are gonna go straight across the parking lot instead of walking around. If you give any consideration to providing the walkway across that or eliminating one of those parking spaces, because I don't think they're gonna walk around.
Right, I mean, that is the depression there for stormwater. So it's part of the drainage ditch that runs along Low Street. So I don't know that we would want to put a walkway across that without impeding the stormwater. That's why we have the sidewalk shown across the frontage, and then the right side of the parking.
Oh, okay. You're just giving kids, but I guess they won't be running into the ditch.
I think that deserves a little more discussion, because I agree with all of that. If you've got a crosswalk coming directly across the street and it's opposite the entrance, the logical connection is straight across the park. And I think there must be some way of dealing with drainage out near the street that would allow a paved surface to come over the top of that. But, you know, the alternative and what's shown in the plan here is it looks like kids have to make a right-hand turn, cross on a crosswalk across the entry, and then walk on a very circuitous sidewalk all the way around the perimeter of the parking to get to the main entrance. And I just think the nature of kids is to go in a straight line, and I would think from an efficiency point of view, from the site plan, you might want to think about just creating a change in paving, creating a direct connection from that crosswalk directly over the door. But I don't think that's possible in terms of the site drainage, and I think it's a much more efficient layout in terms of pedestrian.
Okay, yeah, right. I'm just wondering about, the alignment of the crosswalk over Low. If that would go shift, because it doesn't,
a few feet, and
because it doesn't really line up with the crosswalks coming from the school either. There's a lot of turns in that. A lot of
Well, actually, I'm kind of thinking that across the Low Street orientation is appropriate, because if you think about cars coming in or cars coming out, it's a little bit tiring to be able to see the kids too close. Ingress or egress, you might have some issues there.
Yeah, I do have that concern as well, but I'm not sure it's in the right.
Well,
I think TEC was trying to balance the bump out across the street with not truncating the parent drop off on the Knockmollen too much, but also coming as close to the front door off the Knockmollen as possible. So we could go back to them and ask if we shifted if we shifted it north by 20 feet or so and had it be more of a intersection, would that satisfy your concerns?
Well, I think hurting the children one way or the other is an important consideration, right? First of all, I want yeah, it's not in this presentation, and we've been going meetings and very excited for this project. Get that out there. But if I could point one thing out on the screen, I have a thought here. So when we have drop off here, the cars come out here, they come out of here. And I'm wondering if there's a way you could trim your ability to exit. I was thinking about that myself. You use speed bumps. Right here, the parents are trying to get them. Kids. So I'm a little bit concerned. The exit here, they may or may not. I don't know if something we can do there, or just impede it a bit.
I guess the other consideration, if we're just leaving the plan the way it is, and we're concerned about the drainage ditch, and you want to direct the kids from not walking into the drainage ditch, you can put a small fence and at least guide them towards the sidewalk and then out and around. It's just a kind of
Well, what I was wondering is if the crosswalk across Low Street, if that gets shifted north, either on that side or on the other side, so that you still have the bump out exactly where it is, so parents exiting, picking up their child and then quickly trying to get onto Low Street would have even more personal distance before they see the child crossing. But then you're making the crosswalk at the turn, so it's more of an intersection rather than offset mid-walk.
We had the same conversation when we did the ball field. I think we were having that same restrictive, and I know you guys worked it out. It was like a compromise of compromises that allowed less density with kids walking and people turning. Because when people turn, they're not looking as if, obviously straight.
I can bring this to TEC and see if they have any concerns. I'm not a traffic engineer, so.
I would look at trying to line it up with the entrance. And if you can avoid then the crosswalk at both the entrance and the exit, it's create that direct connection. To me, that's a plus for the kid. And you don't have all of that.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
What I'm saying is, if you move the crosswalk on Low Street just 10 feet, not even to the north, so that it lines up with the new entrance,
Mhm.
then you could eliminate one of the parking spaces, space numbers 6. Could eliminate one of those parking spaces, and you could do a paving change in the traffic lane of the parking lot, and kids could walk directly across the crosswalk and directly to the entrance.
So you're suggesting a crosswalk across the
I'm suggesting a paving change there rather than a crosswalk at the entrance. And then a circuitous sidewalk that gets you around, just much more direct. And, if you've got to cross traffic in the parking lot somewhere, I would almost rather cross the parking lot where cars have slowed down or coming off of Low Street rather than right at Low Street.
Even straight. In the parking lot.
Yeah, the only thing in the parking lot, people are backing up. You know what I mean? It's like, unless you really made it
And the turn right.
significant in the turn right, it's the rainy day thing. You're backing up, people are coming in, kids are walking. You said smarter than I.
I think the right
Well, I
thing to
think
do
if
is
you're
to put it on the
changing
north side of
paving and you're
the.
creating an
I agree.
obvious zone there.
I think you
that's
simplify it and put it on the side of the entry and I wouldn't mess with the
Yeah.
parking lot.
To me,
Yeah, that would work.
Meaning here.
Yeah, that's far cleaner.
And it gives you a far.
Yeah.
That way you can get up more speed.
That's right, let's do that.
Can I ask also, down at the exit, look like there's some sidewalk that's been added there, and there's a crosswalk. Is there an expectation that there are kids walking along side of Low Street there?
No, the scope of this project is to add the sidewalk there, but potentially a future city project, we would want to extend the sidewalk down to the charter school, but it wouldn't be part of this.
Yeah, if I may, and part of the discussion we had, essentially trying to do as cover as possible, Wall Street has been to try to cover, with the improvements that are done on the front of this property to make sure that we've at least accommodated the future connection that may happen, because it's desirable to have one, but it isn't the scope of the project to get back to Wall Street. So that's the reason why it wraps that driveway. Yeah.
One last question, if I could, just in terms of where the drop off and pickup happens, and is there any expectation that there would be vans or small buses or anything moving?
No.
It's all
It's just
private
parents.
cars there. Where does that happen?
So you pull in off of the street at the north entrance and then you drive around and children would be dropped off. You can see if you go to the other plan, Andy, it might be cleaner to see if there's like an entry. Right, right there. And that's the front door to the lobby.
There's also an exit, the.
So you're dropping off and also picking.
That's right, there's another entrance where the small rectangle is on the end of the modular gym, maybe right behind the tree.
Maybe Wayne or someone.
Oh, sorry, sure.
Wayne, are you with us? Did you want to address?
Yeah, I'm here. I just, I agree with Kim's comment about the crosswalk being moved to the north if we could, but we don't want to put the peds and the kids through the parking lot, like the original red line showed. I think we could talk to TEC about moving the crosswalk to the north. I have to just confirm about the queue from the traffic signal at Toppins Lane, that how far does it go back beyond the crosswalk. We were trying to balance keeping a good curb extension, trying to keep the crosswalk closer to the front door of the school as we can, because that's what we thought some of the activity would be. Obviously, it's not close enough. We'd like it even closer. So we were trying to push it to the south originally, but it started pushing more towards the north because we were shortening the pickup drop-off area in front of the school. So that's how we came up with that original location. It was very well vetted and thought out, but the idea of moving it even more north might even work also. So I just want to support that.
I have a couple of questions. One, on the sidewalk parallel to the entry driveway, could that be just brought down along the property line, so you don't have to make kids making the right angle turn, and just be kind of a smoother connection?
I'm sorry, say that again?
So right now, you come in along the driveway, you make a right angle turn to the right, and then another right angle turn to the left. Could you just swoop that sidewalk along parallel to the property line, so it doesn't follow the driveway?
Oh,
Somebody else's property then.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
On the property,
Trying to skirt that, keep it on the property.
Yeah.
skirt that a little bit.
Yeah. That's true. That's correct.
reason why we didn't do that?
You could turn a little bit and follow the fence line, right? Like you showed on the red line there.
Yeah.
Trying to just navigate that property line with it.
It just gets rid of your landscaping, and it it opens the mouth up of the driveway a little bit wider. Right now it's pretty narrow, so you got some little traffic coming in there and control. If you bump that sidewalk in, you lose that narrowness of the entrance point. But I don't think there's much, honestly. It doesn't sound like you're gonna lose a lot.
Sorry, it might be my bad, Wayne. I think Rick was referring to this right
And
here.
I'm not talking about changing the curb, just saying. move
Oh,
the sidewalk.
just sidewalk. Oh, okay. Okay, so leave the curb line, but
Curbing
follow
the
that
way
red
it
line
is.
for the sidewalk. Yep. Yep. Okay,
Then you can landscape that corner if you want it.
Right.
sure, sure.
The second question I have is, it looks like you're planning for a double barrel exit. And that seems dangerous to me on Low Street. So, because one car is gonna be blocking the view of the other. You've got 24-foot wide driveway. Is there some reason you need that double barrel exit, or could we narrow that down?
Well, so on the exit, was that say 24? So they're allowing them to go side to side. I mean, it's snow. I mean, if you make it too narrow, it makes snow clearing really a challenge for us. We could put edge lines in and try to stripe it so it looks like one lane coming out. So you might not have that double barrel, double queue happening side by side.
You've got 16 feet coming in.
Yep.
Just one, you couldn't do 16 feet going
Sure.
out.
I can't see a problem unless Kim sees an issue with that originally.
Attorney, we want to check with the fire department on
Yep.
that too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You're saying provided the fire truck can make a turning radius,
Yeah.
could you shrink it?
Could we shrink it? Because, you know, when you come down the ramp from Route 1 onto Merrimack Street, you always, each car can't see the other car, can't see cars going the other way because the cars are blocking.
Did we talk about whether or not the exit from that 20-foot, 4-foot wide driveway, could that just be a right-hand turn versus?
You can't
You can't do that?
Yeah, you could. Half the city's gonna be angry.
I feel like the practicality.
Yeah,
And I don't.
yeah, I mean, I know what you mean, we talked about, yeah, but it's,
I don't think it practically would probably not be used that way. You know, people will still be trying to.
and the other question I had is on the traffic concept plan. Are we gonna have those lane markings in front of the rec center when the rec center is built? You know, with the understanding that they don't extend beyond the frontage or much beyond the frontage of the property. So is the intent to have to mark those 11-foot lanes?
Yeah.
And the 5-foot lanes?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, that was the whole idea is narrowing the cross section there so we could allow for bike facilities on both north and south side of the street. I assume we'd be doing those markings. Yep.
Okay, and I just was, so I just didn't know whether that was a feasible thing to do to start and end those bike lanes in the middle of the, you know, with no continuation either side. I like it. I really like to have that. I just want to make sure that's possible.
Yeah, so Rick, I don't think we would stripe it for a bike lane. We'd have the space for it. So in the future, when we do put our bike facility in, we got that extra space. So at least I would just call it officially a shoulder, you know, but I wouldn't call it a bike lane officially. I'd call it more of a shoulder, which gives you, so.
It's good. And so you'll be able to look at shifting that crosswalk to the north. And
I have three things, shifting the crosswalk to the north, at the north of the Inn intersection. Angling the sidewalk to hug the property line and looking at potentially narrowing the exit drive, pending turning radius and fire department buy-in.
sounds good.
Can I ask one last question about pickup? And so the only place you can pick up is at the main entrance?
So sorry, I was starting to say, and Andy, if you want to go to, there's another entrance, the gym, that little rectangle next to the dumpster is actually a covered doorway entrance, right behind the tree. Yeah.
Cars
That's
cars
the
should
other.
stack up the width of the gym, like from the main entrance?
I mean, yes, in theory, they could, yes.
Is there any way you could get rid of spaces 22 and 23 and create a lay-by zone there?
I think that's why we had two of those parking spaces be staff only.
22 and 23 are less.
The gym.
The two parallel parking spaces right in front of the gym.
You want to get rid of those
Could you
two?
get rid of those and make that a space for cars to wait? I'm thinking of what he did at the baseball field.
Right, I think that this is gonna be more of a staggered situation I appreciate that you're thinking about like every child leaving at the same time, but I think the way the department, operates, they have sort of staggered leaving and entering into the building, so I'm not sure you wanna. Yeah.
There's a place for at least a few cars. Yeah. That might help.
If there's nothing else, I can open the public hearing. Any comment? Is there anybody here who would like to speak? Yes, board. Name and address, if you know the
Bonnie Sontag, 21 Smith Street. I'm speaking as a member of the Newburyport Livable Streets group. I'm concerned about kids, almost the initial comment you had before talking about crosswalks. The possibility that they may try to walk or walk their bikes along the Low Street side where there are no sidewalk. And there was an idea earlier about putting a fence up to guide the kids. I think it was yours. And I don't know if this is a big enough issue at this point. I know eventually we want to have sidewalks on that side of the street. And if it's a concern you have now, maybe something should be done preventatively, or you can wait and see if it becomes a problem and deal with it then. It's not exactly good planning. So it's a concern, especially with kids coming potentially up from the charter school. We know now they're gonna have to cross Low Street down where they normally do, walk up the sidewalk and come across this new crossing. And I really think that's a great idea that you come up with for the moving the crossing. But just kids are kids, as you were saying earlier, something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else who wishes to speak? No? Okay, go ahead.
Ms. Smith, do you want to address the planning board?
Yeah, can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Yep, Owen Smith, 175 Story Avenue, two comments. The first one has to do with the Low Street crosswalk. It's a mid-block crosswalk. I know those are not desirable. I can see that's why they want to put the hawk signal in. My comment is maybe moving the crosswalk a bit further east on Low Street, closer to the existing Armory building. At least that way it lines up with the front entrance to the school, which is probably the more direct route anyway they're going to take. Right now, I think it would encourage jaywalking because they'll just cut across and then cut into the gym. The concern with that though is right turning vehicles outside of the facility would have limited sight distance of people crossing there though. So that might require some mitigations to the mid-block crosswalk be above and beyond a hawk signal. And then my second comment has to do with the pickup and drop off lane they have on the north side of Low Street. Building a pedestrian bump out probably and shifting the lanes further south to provide more room because right now that shoulder that people do the pickup drop off in, they foul the travel lane, which does create a hazard to the vehicles traveling and also pedestrians. So I'm curious if there's some thought about just shifting the lanes further south to address that need, which is pickup and drop off. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, then we'll close the public comment. Actually, one other thing did occur to me as a question. I think somebody had mentioned the concern at the exit about the fire truck turning movement. How about the entrance? It seems like it's a very sharp turn as vehicles come in, and there's a tree and some shrubs there. Is that? Have you looked at the turning radius at that entrance? For fire
Yeah, we looked at the turning radius for, the entrance and the exit. I mean, I will definitely double check, make sure that that works. But yeah, you're certain that, yeah.
Because it seems tighter than the exit.
Yeah.
Yeah, then. They're probably some of these are right. So, all of them.
Yeah.
So you're quite, probably still have some flexibility to work the other side. if it worked. But
I'm just thinking, if cars are parked in the parking spaces, treated that, this over there. No, over
here.
Yes. So.
Yeah, those are just perennials.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's not two flowering dogwoods, it's not in
And
the,
then we don't have curbing within the parking lot itself, only on the outside where there's a sidewalk. There is no curbing on that inside.
so they can go
They
over,
can drive with this thing.
right over the bushes, right? We just have to hit the car. Yeah, just something. Okay, can I ask about, Kim, about your timeline? We could do this two different ways. We could try to wrap everything up tonight, which I originally thought was possible, but there are a lot of comments here, so I don't know whether you have a quick timeline that you need to get done, or whether.
So our last report to the council was that we would have this out to bid late November.
November sixth, if we made our final decision on November sixth, would that be?
That should be fine.
That was just to make sure. Yeah, I think that would assume you might be able to get back to that meeting, review again before. The changes and everything all there.
So can I just go over what changes you're looking for to make sure? So we have them moving the crosswalk north. Angling the sidewalk to hug the property line. Looking at potentially narrowing that exit drive, but double checking the turning radius on both and checking the fire department sign off. And then am I eliminating parking spaces 22 and 23 and making that apparent?
I'm sorry, can we let the just leave it at that?
I would caution about eliminating them as parking spaces, because then you're looking for a variance from parking. So, because right now they're just meeting it. You could consider maybe making them a shorter duration parking spot. Still meeting the ordinance and perhaps addressing the concern brought up about wanting to have them more available for people coming.
Technically, one of those would be available without. What they're right.
Do you have one excess or?
Here, out of those two, there's only one that could numerically be. Is that
You're
right?
right. If you,
I don't think they have an extra. I think they have to,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. So I thought I got the impression-
Right.
that's,
if you make
So
the
I-
exit narrower from 24 feet to 16 feet, you may pick up an extra spot next to space number 12.
Maybe.
So if you designated those two spaces in front of the gym as 15-minute spaces, would they still qualify?
we do not address that, so I'm going to say yes, we would still.
But then it becomes a drop-off pickup.
I'd like to call them short-term parking. In order to meet the ordinance.
Okay.
Rolls.
So is that it, Chairman?
That's what I have on my list.
So what I would suggest is that we close the public hearing and continue the discussion to November 6th.
Sorry, if I may,
Yes.
just for procedural purposes, I would technically recommend that the hearing remain open when we get receiving new information from the applicant. That should be taken into
Okay.
account.
Okay. I will do. Can somebody make that motion?
Move to continue the public hearing to the November 6th.
So second. Okay, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay. All right.
Looks like a good project. It really came together well. Now that Jim, it's, we always have questions about parking.
So we have one more item of general business that we should take care of, which is an informal discussion with BP Merrimack LLC about 310 to 312 Merrimack.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Aiden Church. I'm a law clerk at Seaside Legal Solutions, address 123 Main Street, Gloucester. I'm here tonight on behalf of BP Merrimack LLC, the owner of 310 and 312 Merrimack Street and 3 Woodland Street. I believe that BP's principal, Mike Becker, is also available via Zoom to answer any questions that I might not be able to answer. So, like I said, we're here for an informal review. I just want to give you some background on this project, and I'll sort of explain why in a little bit here. But just for some background first, the proposal right now is to build a garage addition to the existing two-family structure, which is shown on the south there, fronting on Merrimack Street. And then there are two separate freestanding single-family additions. The first one connects to the existing garage that fronts on Woodland, and then a carriage house in the rear of the lot. Next, please. So background on the lot, it's located in the WMD district. It's technically two parcels, as I mentioned, the 3 Woodland Streets in the rear there, that's vacant and undersized that merged for zoning purposes. The existing two-family structure is non-conforming as it relates to the front yard setback and the height. The use is also technically non-conforming. It would require a special permit, long-standing use. So that's grandfathered. And then the garage also, which is on the front yard. So the relief that's required for this project is pretty extensive. We'll need from the ZBA a use special permit for the proposed single-family use and a number of dimensional variances. First would be lot area. We technically have enough area for the two-family use currently, but you can't use that existing lot area to cover the new proposed two families. We need a front yard variance for the building number 2, which is on the front on Woodland Street. The side and rear yard variances for the carriage house. And then we have section 6C, as was mentioned pretty extensively earlier. And that's why we're here tonight. So we're not actually requesting any relief from the planning board. You can move to the next slide, please. So we're here because, as was mentioned previously, you guys have purview over section 6C generally in terms of special permit. The issue with that is that the special permit only allows for 2 single-family dwellings. It doesn't allow for the configuration that we're looking for. So that would require variance in and of itself from the ZBA. So there was an idea floated of asking for a varied special permit, but it seemed to make more sense as the city staff was looking at it to request all the relief from the ZBA to get some feedback from you guys because this is your sort of area of expertise in regard to this section, and hopefully support from you as well. You can go to the next, please. So the purpose basically of constructing the separate freestanding structures rather than, the applicant could probably pretty easily add a conforming addition to the rear of the structure and just require a use special permit. But he's working with the Massachusetts Historical Commission and the National Park Service on hopefully getting some grant funding for historic rehabilitation. And in informal meetings with them to date, they have very much preferred the separate freestanding structures rather than sort of what would potentially diminish the historic characteristics of the existing house by adding on to them. So that was built in 1775. And that plan shown on the screen right now is from 1914. So you see the historic layout of the lot itself. And so it's registered with the National Register of Historic Places, and it's also the inventory of historic and archaeological assets. So I think I just have the whole plan set queued up here, which we don't necessarily have to go through unless anybody has any specific questions, but again, this is site plan, the proposed works in red. I can scroll through, I think there's just building plans for the addition to the existing structure. So there's a garage addition there. That would be the first floor addition, again, is the garage, it's on the left there. There'd be a bedroom above that, that's the existing two-family structure. And then here's just the front section plans here. You can go next again. And then move on to the building number 2 floor plans. Sorry, this is the last elevation of the existing. Yeah, you keep going. Sorry. More cross sections there. So here are the floor plans for the second building. As you see, there's the existing garage there shown on the right, and it'll be a 3-bedroom, 2-story structure. You can keep going through there. So these are the architectural plans. As you can see, they sort of will match the historic characteristics of the existing house. And then finally, this is the carriage house, which is a 2-bedroom, also use. And then here's just an aerial view of the lot, sort of the surrounding properties. Next, please. This is just the assessor's map, shows the whole neighborhood. You see the lot there. Inside. Here's the existing structure from multiple angles. So then I wanted to touch on the section 6C requirements, which is why we're here. As you can see, though, we're requesting variances from a lot of the section. The intention is to comply with it as much as possible. So subsection A pertains to lot requirements. As I mentioned, we need a number of dimensional variances from the ZBA. So you have, there's the lot area requirement, the setback requirements, and then the compliance with other zoning regulations. Again, we'll ask for relief from the ZBA. And then the fourth subsection here pertains to the configuration of the layout of the structures, the multiple structures on the lot. Again, because we have 3, we can't technically conform with that. We are converting an existing garage into a separate structure. And because we're on the corner lot, we can front on either of those lots. We partially comply with that section. Next, please. And here's just layout again, just so you can see it. Next, please. So subsection B is the preservation restriction subsection, so we do intend to comply with this subsection. We have a draft PR in the works currently, but we sort of put it on hold as we move through this process. But assuming that things go well here with the ZBA, we'll get the historic commission as soon as possible. Next, please. So here's your special permit criteria, and again, though we're not requesting a special permit, we do believe that we meet these standards. Ultimately, you know, we're adding additional housing to the city's housing stock while retaining the historic characteristics of the lot and the neighborhood. So we think that we will be consistent with the residential character of the neighborhood. We won't diminish privacy of any of the adjacent lots. As you'll see in the next slide, there's a boat yard in the rear that also sort of wraps around into the right yard, the right side yard setbacks. So the carriage house, which is the only proposal that actually abuts any of the abutters, is again, as you'll see, there's like one story behind. And then building number 2 fronts on Woodland, and then the existing building again fronts on Merrimack Street, and is only being expanded. Then, sorry, there's one more subsection there. But I think I already touched. You can go ahead. So there's just that view again, so you can see tucking in that the carriage house and that right hand side would just basically abut those boats, and there's no work that would really affect the adjacent property. The subsection B, again, pertains to what you guys can do with setbacks and require further setbacks again, we're requesting setback relief. But then there's also the condition you can't further subdivide lot or divide. And accept the condition on whatever leaves that we get from the ZBA that would further subdivision. It probably wouldn't be allowable by law anyways because it would create oversized lot. And I think finally subsection E is the financial contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We're willing to comply with this section as well. I think that about wraps it up for the section 6C requirements and a basic overview of the project. Again, we're interested in the planning board's feedback on what we're doing here. Anything that you guys think can help us get to a yes here and with the zoning board.
Okay, any comments from anybody or questions?
So just to clarify, just to be sure, so the existing house is a two-family house?
Yeah.
And you'd be converting that to a single family?
No, that'll remain a
It
two-family.
remains a two-family, okay.
So the carriage house is an independent dwelling unit.
Yes. It's considered an independent, single-family use.
The financial assistance that you're looking for, Mass Historic or wherever, that pertains to building number one, the existing building?
I believe it pertains, I'm not sure if it pertains only to that building or not, or the project.
So I would, so they want to say something?
Hi, this is Mike Becker. I'm the applicant.
Okay,
Yes, any historic tax credits that would be issued would be only for work done on building one.
So sorry, thank you, actually, because I guess what that was actually myself. Because I had previously heard reference to a grant. We're talking about tax credits as opposed to a grant per se. Just for context, just so the board understands exactly what's being referred to here. We're talking about the typical tax credit structure, not necessarily a specialized grant program for some structures. Is that?
Yeah, I'm going to misspoke when it said.
Just want to make sure.
so I had a concern, I think. When I look at the two-part things. The existing garage that is on Merrimack Street, on Woodland Street, is not much to look at. And adding that house to that garage doesn't really create, in terms of the elevations I'm seeing here, doesn't create anything special. So I guess I don't see why you would not just have a separate building number two comply with the front setback requirements and not be attached to it. It doesn't seem, I don't see what the rationale is for attaching a house to the garage and pushing it so close to the street. I think you could have, one less level of relief from the zoning board by pushing it back, and it would also lessen, that's a pretty tight narrow street there. So I would think that you might want to push that house further back just for livability.
We wouldn't be opposed to pushing it further from the street. However, that's the location that the previous 3 Woodland historically was, and we were trying to match the buildings that were there.
I understand that. I just don't understand why. There was a house there at one point. There isn't one there now. It wasn't connected to the garage. There wasn't a garage. So, it seems to me that it's kind of stretching things a little bit to try to put it there. It would just make more sense to try to put it a little bit further back from the street and not to, I think it would be more historically accurate, not to attach it to the garage. I think it's looking very 20th century, the way it's 20th century, not 21st century. It's looking very 1950ish, I guess, the way it's showing right now. So I would just separate it from the garage. because you're not gonna try to match the style of the garage. And try to have something that's a little bit more consistent with zoning setbacks. I don't have a problem with the idea of 4 units on this lot and in 3 different buildings. I guess that's just the one that really just jumps out at me as not having a good rationale.
The thought process there was that the garage is in good condition. I hate to demolish a perfectly good structure. And I didn't want the building to be less historically accurate, but then also I didn't want the building to be subservient to the garage, like kind of hiding behind the garage. So it was sort of a fine line. We were walking there between, putting the building back where it was or demolishing the garage, which I'm kind of opposed to that general thought process. Perfectly good building. So I'd be happy to incorporate the feedback of the board if that was a sticking point.
Yeah, I agree. I think the garage can stay. It's there. Just don't see the connecting the building. I think the garage, as Andy said, having the garage be the driving factor in how you design the building. I think that the building could be historic. I mean, who's gonna know that it was historically 4.3 feet back from the street? Nobody's gonna know that. It's not gonna be,
Unless you're recreating.
yeah, right, yeah, unless you recreate what was there. But again, I think that it's really contorting things a little bit. I think that, again, you could move the building, separate the building from the garage. It's not gonna be historically located if you attach it to the garage. So that's my perspective. Maybe nobody's gonna agree with me on that, but I think that that's the wrong way to go. If it were me, if I were, the big developer, I would actually demolish the garage and put the house kind of on the property line. But, yeah.
I tend to agree with
Yeah.
that, so.
Go ahead.
Just for quick, clarification, just so because we've had some discussion recently about the siege. If folks are interested in getting relief from that section, whether or not they be permitting and so forth. Just for clarity, is your approach here is that some relief granted by the ZBA and still all for ZBA. So this application would, other than the informal feedback here that may be run into or considered by the ZBA, all permitting would take place before the ZBA is your reps right now. Yes. Okay, thank you. I think that's helpful for somebody because we've had discussion about this section before.
And I don't think you're actually asking for us to make a recommendation.
We're just looking for informal. Oh, yeah, sorry. To clarify, I actually was referring more to the idea that we as staff, like,
Yes.
some of the considerations that were raised here, some of the ZBA could take those into account, not necessarily here, yeah.
Yeah, again, we're giving you, as you requested, informal feedback. Anybody else have anything that they would like to offer? Good. Okay. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Approval of minutes. I haven't seen this if ever did. I made some comments on the September 4th minutes, another chance to look at the minutes. Does anybody have any other further comments? Okay, so can we, motion, I don't want to move on to the chance. Can we have a motion to approve the September 4th as amended?
Motion to approve September 4th, 2024 minutes as amended.
Second. Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Can we not review and approve the housing production plan?
Yeah, I quite frankly, I assume so, we'll take November.
We already said to November sixth.
Yeah.
For November sixth, we have,
Oh, yes.
Do my notes for.
yeah. So November sixth, we have the public hearing on 3 Center Street, the special permit for short-term rental units. The public hearing, joint public hearing with the Planning and Development Committee on BTA zoning.
Yeah.
We are going to approve a decision for 59 Willow Street.
Yeah.
We're going to approve the planning board report on PPOD, and we're going to approve the housing production. Is there anything else that we might?
Not this time, of knowledge, I obviously will do our best to push anything out, anything new, out to you as soon as possible. You know. If you have any thoughts or anything you want to communicate with us. So we can obviously be as productive as possible.
So let's do the MBTA zoning first. Planning and Development Committee is here. And let's rush through that.
Yeah.
Done quick.
Yeah.
I think 3 Center Street might be, who knows? And then we'll hopefully get that done quickly and then do the 2 approvals, decisions afterwards. Then it'll be done early enough that we can.
If we know we have the right attendees for 3 Center.
Doesn't matter, we're starting over. Are we starting over with this?
You're. Listen to the page and make it. Well,
It doesn't have to be.
What is, anybody who may have to listen to the page for some reason. Please do so. Yeah, Caitlin's gonna sort of back. If that's you, if you could just make sure that. We should use that. You can get it wherever.
Good. Is Charlie?
What, motion to adjourn?
Thank you.